Welcome back to FPL Therapy, a weekly podcast hosted by me, FPL Raptor. I'll hopefully guide you through the FPL season and make you laugh along the way because everybody needs a little bit of FPL therapy. As you know, each week we are joined by a different guest, and for Game Week 3, I'm delighted to say that we have Sam, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. Sam is not only the co-host of the brilliant podcast Who Got the Assist, but also has his own YouTube channel. I truly mean it when I say this, one of the most underrated YouTube channels, not just in FPL, but in YouTube in general. If you enjoy YouTube FPL content, please go and check him out. Just type in FPL Pricey. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be tagged in the title and the description. I guarantee you'll get some value and entertainment from it. So please do check it out. But Sam, how are you doing, mate?
Thank you very much. Yeah, that was as kind of intro as I'm ever going to get. I don't think even my mum talks about me in that way. But yeah, hopefully I live up to that recommendation. Thank you all so much. And thank you for having me on the show today. It's a real honor. We've had already some incredible guests on here. So yeah, hopefully I live up to some pretty lofty expectations from the first few shows.
I've set you up too highly.
Yeah,
there,
you have. Yeah.
Okay.
I needed to bring it back down a bit.
Okay, yeah, Sam is actually terrible. No, but really, so hopefully you get some value as always today. And do make sure if you're listening on podcast, it's incredibly important for podcasts. I didn't know this, that you do rate 5-star if you like the show. So if throughout the show, if you're enjoying on Apple or Spotify, please do rate us 5-star. And if you're watching on YouTube, the classic like, comment and subscribe. I do really appreciate it. We're very close to 10,000 subscribers and I would love to hit that milestone for this episode. Please do consider subscribing. So in today's episode, as always, we'll review our teams, this time from Game Week 2. I didn't have a particularly good week, which we'll discuss in a bit. We'll then look ahead to Game Week 3 and discuss that in relation to some of the key events from the previous game week. So we'll talk about the likes of Haaland and also teams coming up as well. And we're going to answer some of your questions throughout and then also look at our teams for Game Week 3 and beyond. So without further ado, let's start with Sam's team for Game Week 2. And we discussed off air that this is a great week for you to come on because you've actually had a very good game week in Game Week 2. So for those that are listening on audio, for obviously on YouTube, it'll be on your screen now. Sam's team scored 85 points in Game Week 2 without any chips being played, I may add, which was fantastic. In goal, Raya with 10 points, and we will discuss Raya because he didn't do that for me last season. In defence, Trent, Porritt and Robinson, a full house from the defence once again, which is lovely to see. The midfield, pretty good as well. Saka with a return, Smith Rowe with a 10-pointer, which is obviously brilliant. Bruno Fernandes, who continues to disappoint a bit, and Nkunku. And then a front line of Isak, Haaland and Armstrong. Little teaser for the rest of the episode, Sam is a Southampton fan, so maybe a bit of bias there. And then the bench is Valdemarsson, Minte, Barco and Hall. A couple of issues, but I do love that you've got Minte in place from Game Week 4 onwards. So I'll turn the laptops in case you need to remind yourself. Yeah. That is your team. Talk us through it. Like, why did you use the players you did? Are you happy with your Game Week 2? And how's it looking moving forward?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with Raya. Into the season, in my first few videos when I started up the preseason content, I wasn't in any way hot on the Arsenal defence. No. And then I started over the weeks because you get bored and you start looking at more and more detail. I started looking at how Arsenal performed defensively, even away from home against some of the toughest opposition. And as it turns out, their XGC per 90, expected goals per 90, conceded per 90, was actually the very same as it would have been pretty much in any other fixture. Yep. So against the best opposition, their numbers were still incredible.
They just control the game so well, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. So although that didn't necessarily happen against Villa per se, in general, I was very happy to have Arsenal coverage. And having Raya in my team was more about how it balanced out with the rest of the defence. I knew I wanted at least two of the more premium defenders in there in my side as well. So Raya was that slightly cheaper way in, and it enabled me to have that balance in the back three as well. So I couldn't have asked it to go better. I wasn't expecting bonus points or as many saves as he's gotten. So yeah, that's been a tad fortunate, but I really like the Raya pick. I'm very glad I went there for a starting point. Yeah,
I think I'm very jealous of Raya. And I said again off air that I had Raya last season just for 6 points, 6 points, 6 points, 2 points, 2.6. And now he's just come out of an 8 and a 10 or a 9 and a 10. It's ridiculous. And maybe this is a sign of things to come that Arsenal might concede more shots and Raya might be well and truly worth that price tag. Something else I noticed about your team is that you've got very expensive players and then you're relying on a few cheaper ones, but you've got kind of squad depth. So you've got Haaland in there, but you've got Isak, you've also got Saka, you've got Bruno, you've got an expensive defence. So it means that each week you're starting two of Smith Rowe, Armstrong and Minte. So are you happy with those 3 cheap picks? Is there anyone stands out early that might become an issue?
Yeah, I think there might be one there. So I went into the season again wanting to do that rotation of those 3 assets. I felt the fixtures between the 3 of them suited at least 2 of the players each week. And I thought the underlying data on all 3 of which, obviously Armstrong came from the Championship, so a little bit different, and Minte from the Eredivisie. So again, maybe a little bit cautious on that, but came with a lot of hype. I was very happy to own the combination of all 3 and bench 1 each week. So far, the plan has been going relatively well.
Yeah, I think so.
I think Armstrong is already looking like an issue. Maybe I have to put my hands up and say there's a tad of bias going on there. I was hoping that we'd at least get a chance against Nottingham Forest, but that clearly didn't happen. Okay. So that's probably an issue I need to sort out eventually. I wouldn't say it's an immediate sell right now. He is still on penalties. He is hopefully going to get 70, 80 minutes a match minimum. We'll come on to that, obviously. But yeah, overall, I'm happy to have Minte in place. Very happy with Smith Rowe. Good fixtures for the next couple as well. So yeah, those cheapies have helped me create a bit of depth and enabled me to have a couple of more expensive players too. So I quite like the balance so far.
It's a lovely team, mate. I see no major issues with it. So you got 85 points. Was there some temptation to go for triple captain Haaland? Because if you did, you would have ended over 100 points. And I did watch a couple of your videos where you were going back and forth a little bit. Approaching the deadline, was you close, or did you just decide you want to save it for later?
You know what? The closer I got to the deadline, I think the further away I pulled from it. Okay. And again, maybe this doesn't put me in a great light because he obviously went and banged a hat-trick in. But the way I saw it going into the deadline was, okay, it's early season. City usually take a few weeks to get fully up to speed. And whilst it's Ipswich, and you can probably take a fairly good bet that they'll be one of the weaker defences, we don't know for sure who the whipping boys are going to be just yet. And I felt that Ipswich are going to try and sit back. They're going to try and make it as cagey as possible. And early season, you just never know what's going to happen. So I hesitated and I thought, you know what? If I've got those doubts now and he does really well against Ipswich, I've got the away game later on in the season, or I've got games against Southampton twice, games against Leicester twice, Everton and Wolves as well look like good fixtures at the moment too, and then maybe 1 or 2 double game weeks. So yeah, obviously the result means that I do kind of wish I went there, but overall I probably wouldn't change a thing. I'm still fairly happy with the performance, and means I've got it saved for later, and hopefully you can repeat that again.
Yeah, I mean, so you're on 155 points overall, which is more than me, more than a lot of people, and no chips played, and your team's got a good structure and personnel moving forward. We'll discuss maybe when we do your team at the end for Game Week 3. You have made a transfer already, which we will discuss. And also there might be a couple of issues on your bench, which might force a slightly earlier wildcard. But for now, generally pretty happy with the team.
Yeah.
Cool. So very briefly, my team, if you've been listening to FPL Therapy or watching my YouTube videos, then you'll know that I went without Haaland. And as a result, it was a bit of a stinky Game Week 2, but I'll just read it out for those of you on audio. So Henderson in goal, obviously blanked. A full house as per Sam with Robinson, Porro and Trent. Midfield was a little bit disappointing, but also got some returns in there. So Nkunku and Eze both blanking again. I don't know how Eze non-owners are getting away with it. And Sam is one of those, and it's so frustrating because he's had so many chances. But Saka got a 6-pointer, Diogo Jota with the 6-pointer as well. Salah saved me because until that Salah goal, I wasn't only looking at a red arrow, I was looking at just dropping into the abyss. So that Salah 10-pointer with the 2 bonus was massive. So him as captain got me 20. And then unfortunately, a blank for Maniz and a blank for Isak. And the bench consisted of Gabriel, Greaves, Cannon. So I did bench Gabriel's clean sheet, but it was for Robinson, who actually got 1 point more. So overall, if I actually just look at my team, I had a pretty good game week. 59 points is good. Most of my players returned. My captain got 10 points.
Yeah.
It's just Haaland obviously smashed it. And I suppose I didn't own the likes of João Pedro and Smith Rowe that a lot of other people did that obviously had good weeks. This is going to sound like massive copium for not having Haaland, and people are just like crying more in my comments. But Salah has got 24 points in Game Week 1 and 2. Haaland has got 24 points in Game Week 1 and 2. So just purely looking at the two of them, they've scored the same number of points in Game Week 1 and 2. I actually think Salah's done better, though, because if you'd have gone for Haaland and no Salah, you captained Isak in Game Week 1, not Haaland, and then you captained Haaland in Game Week 2. Whereas if you went for Salah, you probably captained Salah in both. Yeah. So overall, I would say Salah is up on Haaland, and you have an extra 2.5 to spend.
Exactly.
It's just whether you did much with that 2.5. And the fact that options like Smith Rowe and João Pedro are smashing it, that's back in favour of the Haaland drafts because those cheaper assets are doing so well, and Rodgers looks like a great asset too. So I would say overall they're fairly equal. I mean, I'm 13 points behind you, but I don't think that's due to Haaland. It's due to a couple of your other players like Raya and Smith Rowe doing very well.
For sure. Yeah.
So yeah, massive copium. I didn't own Haaland. I still don't, and I probably won't. And the hat-trick obviously hurt a lot. But overall, I don't think that Salah owners and Haaland non-owners are doing that badly. Would you agree, or do you think I'm just trying to cope with this pain?
I wouldn't disagree at all.
Okay.
So I was struggling a little bit myself between Salah and Haaland, and even potentially both at times as well. And the way Salah started the season, all the doubts that we would have had going in under slots, under the fact that he might be playing a little bit more wide, and maybe they won't be quite so good with chance creation, all of that's completely dissipated immediately. They are still the same Liverpool with minor, more conservative tweaks in the back line, and I actually think that brings us on to Liverpool defence later on. But Salah himself looks as fit, as sharp as ever, and for 2.5 million less, it's what you can do with the rest of it. And honestly, we're 2 weeks in. Haaland will not, well, I hope he does, but he will not score a hat-trick every single week. So I imagine it does balance out. And like you just said, they're both on 24 points each. So a lot comes down to what else are you doing with that money.
This is true, yeah.
And it's just happenstance at times that after 2 weeks, the 5.5 million picks that I might have in my side happen to have scored the points. But like you said, you've got the likes of Eze, and I'd really prefer to be sat here with Eze in my team right now. He just hasn't done the points. Yeah. So, yeah, I wouldn't be too worried just yet. It's only 13 points, and that is one Salah haul. Meanwhile, Haaland blanking, and you're straight back up there. So don't worry too much.
I think that's a good sort of overarching point here, is that don't look game week by game week. Because if you look game week by game week, I've had an awful game week too, but overall I'm still up in comparison to some Haaland drafts. And if you'd have looked at Haaland drafts in game week 1, you would have gone, they are terrible, and Salah drafts are smashing it, and all of a sudden it's back again. So, and even like Saka, Palmer, Son, who we'll discuss, Saka smashed it in game week 1, Son and Palmer smashed it in game week 2. So I think you need to look at, we say kind of 4 to 6 weeks as a sample size generally, but we're not going to be able to know which structure or team is doing better until kind of that period of time. And as of right now, both drafts have worked well. One of each has worked really well. And in all honesty, I've seen some neither drafts that have got more points than me because they had Son, Saka, Palmer. And if you captained Son last week or Palmer, then you smashed it. So overall, I think basically, and I'm glad about this, all of the structures and strategies could have worked. It just depends on those kind of surrounding players, I think.
Absolutely.
Cool. So what we're going to do then, after obviously reviewing our teams for Game Week 2, is we're going to go through each game from Game Week 2, discuss some key things that stood out. But don't worry, if you're someone that doesn't really like the review format and you're thinking, I'd rather you just look forward to Game Week 3, we are looking forward to Game Week 3 by doing this. So we're going to say, these players did this, we were impressed, therefore, from Game Week 3 onwards, because there were a few complaints of it's a bit too much like a review of the previous game week. We are, during this section, going to be looking ahead to future game weeks as well. So the first game, Brighton 2, Man United 1. Well, Man United. We'll just maybe discuss Man United in a second. I need to prepare mentally for that as a Man United fan. I don't know why you're laughing as a Southampton fan.
Yeah, I know. It's going to be horrible.
But yeah, so we'll do Man United in a second. But Brighton looked very impressive once again. So they're now 6th for expected goals conceded and 5th for expected goals conceded, 6th for expected goals over the opening 2. You would argue they haven't had an easy fixture per se. Whilst Everton look really weak and United aren't brilliant, they aren't two fixtures that we targeted as those are great fixtures. So I think overall their opening 2, they were okay, but not brilliant fixtures. And for them to look as impressive as they do, I think Arsenal will look at this now and this is not an easy game for them coming up. And it's all those cheap attackers, Minte, Matoma, João Pedro, Welbeck. They're either getting on the score sheet or just looking very good. The underlying data is strong. The minutes are strong for some of them as well. So what do you think of Brighton? And has kind of anyone stood out to you as a real asset? I mean, you've got Minte in your team.
I do.
Try to remove the bias of, I know you do like him as an option, you've got him. Does he still stand out to you at 5.5, 5.6, or is there someone else that maybe looks slightly better?
Yeah, so even as a Minte option, I think I'd be first to admit that I don't think he's necessarily the one that stood out for me yet. Okay. I'm hopeful that he still ends up being that guy. It's obviously only 2 weeks, and the first week he was playing very well against Everton, went off with that concussion protocol. But I think the one that stood out for me, despite I think you'll talk about the underlying data for him, João Pedro has been really impressive. Perhaps not necessarily for the data reasons, but more the fact he's staying on the pitch and acting like that leader. Yeah,
so 81 minutes and 98 minutes actually across the first 2. So his minutes look better than anyone else, which we did not expect. Especially considering he only had 45 minutes of pre-season football.
I know, yeah.
That's
really
crazy
surprising.
To then go and start back-to-back and get virtually 90 minutes in both.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think for 5.5, you're just not going to get a better asset at that price point anywhere in the game, let alone up front. He's on penalties. And okay, he does start in the 10 more often than not. But what I found really interesting is last few clutches of the match, they're like, okay, we'll throw him up and we'll put him at that number 9 role, take off Welbeck instead. Yep. And okay, all of the substitutions are still being made, and we were worried about his minutes, but he's the guy staying on the pitch at the moment. Yeah. So I think Hertzler sees him as one of those leaders in the camp and one of those finishers for him. So I'm pretty jealous of João Pedro owners. I think he's going to keep performing pretty well. Mitoma down the left wing as well has looked fantastic. So a quick word on him too.
What a footballer.
Yeah, absolutely unbelievable. I think we all just kind of collectively forgot he existed going into pre-season. But he's come back. He's, I think, 27 now, so this is a big year for him.
I saw that the other day. Someone said Matoma's now 27. In my head, he was like 23, 24. So this is now, he's not a bench option young player that's going to come. This is his season. He needs to step up. So
100%.
I would expect that. And I think you're spot on with both, though. The minutes for João Pedro has been the biggest surprise for me. And I said, if I am wrong and he's not a rotation risk, then I've made a huge mistake not picking him. And I still believe that. It's obviously an easy mistake to rectify because he's so cheap. But anyone that went with João Pedro, I think, is feeling very good. Now, obviously, you don't really want to start him in game week 3, but you could. But from 4 onwards, Ipswich and Nottingham Forest at home in 4 and 5. So, yeah, João Pedro is looking great. A slightly worrying stat, and I don't want to put you off João Pedro because he has been fantastic. So over the first 160 minutes, which is basically before Welbeck came off in the second game, João Pedro actually only had 0.06 XG accumulated. And I know people hate XG, and I don't want this to be too much of a stats data-driven podcast. But what that means is over the first 160 minutes, he didn't get really any chances to score goals. And whilst he looked fantastic, you could argue one of the best players in game week 1, if not the best, even though he didn't get on the score sheet. And in game week 2, he was, even if you ignore the goal, probably man of the match for Brighton. Looking good and playing well means nothing in FPL. You want those chances to score. And so I worry if he continues to play as the 10 with Welbeck as the 9 or eventually Ferguson as the 9, is he going to get those chances to score goals outside of course, the penalties? And he will get opportunities, but his data in previous seasons has been so good. Are we going to see a reduction? And if so, is someone like a Welbeck or Ferguson, who's going to start as the 9 more often than not, going to be the better option? Of course, they have Rutter who can play as the 10 now, and it could be that João Pedro, as a result, starts as the 9. It feels very harsh to drop Welbeck. So I still have a lot of questions, and that's not even mentioning, again, Ferguson will be back soon. Adingra, when he came on, obviously provided the goal. He's so good. He won't keep sitting on the bench. And eventually Solly March will come back on the right, which might push Minte, who can play as a number 10. So I just worry that with all of that going on, there are still a few unknowns. And whilst I love game week 4 and 5 for Brighton, the fixtures after that then turn for the worse. So if you look from sort of game week 3 to 10, I hate the fixtures for Brighton overall. So I feel like they might be a side that I end up overlooking and probably regretting, because we've seen now, not that they're fixture proof, but in difficult fixtures, they will still create chances. So I am really interested to see how they do against Arsenal. If they create chances against Arsenal and score goals and these players look great again, I'm absolutely interested. And maybe that will turn my head for game week 4 against Ipswich. So that's Brighton looking great. I think if you have any of their assets, you're feeling good. You don't have to bench them this week, but ideally, if you've got someone else you can rotate in as you do, then you probably want to do that.
Yeah.
I guess we've got to discuss Man United. Well, I mean, can you start? I just what did you make of Man United against Brighton? Because in game week 1, I think our performance against Fulham was highly impressive.
Yeah,
but now I'm wondering, was that a stinker from Fulham? Was it just that game week 1 desire to play well? Obviously at Old Trafford, maybe traditionally slightly stronger there. Or maybe was game week 2 just Brighton were very good? I struggle because I'm obviously so biased as a United fan, but what did you make of it?
Yeah, so I think it's quite easy to get quite polarising views on Man United because everyone's got a passionate view one way or the other. I am actually fairly neutral as they come with Man United,
wow, okay.
So I don't have a burning hatred for them or anything. So when I watch them, I try to assess them on merit, and I don't think against Fulham they were getting enough credit necessarily, and then against Brighton I think they were being put down a little bit too hard.
Okay.
I don't think they were absolutely awful. They did create chances. Obviously the second goal that never was, we'll kind of forget about that in a week, but if the data was just snuck into the underlying XG, it was a very even game. They did create chances. Bruno, again, we need to talk about him at some point because I need a bit of therapy from you on that one, and I need your honest opinion on him. Okay, but I don't think Man United are a panic button right now. I think things will come good. They will be chaotic at times because this is the style of play that Ten Hag likes to play.
Yep.
But there are enough signs there that I don't think it's a lost cause, and I still think they'll be competitive.
Okay, thank you for that. That's made me feel a little bit better. I think I'm ready now. So basically what happened in game week 1 and also in game week 2 is we played Mount and Bruno Fernandes as, I don't even know how to explain it, but 2 number 9/2 number 10. So we didn't have an out-and-out number 9. Mount maybe at points was slightly higher due to the press, but Mount and Fernandes were rotating positions where one was an attacking midfielder and one was essentially playing as a forward, which on paper sounds horrendous. What that did we did so well in game week 1, and even at the start of game week 2, is our press is fantastic at the moment. I would say we're one of the best sides in the Prem. Considering last year we were one of the worst, it's so good to see, and Mount's energy is so crucial to that press. So that's why we're playing that system. But then we lose the ability to create chances, not because Mount can't create them, but who are we creating them for? Rashford is really struggling at the moment. Ahmad is fantastic, but he's playing a very wide role where he sticks to the wing. So Fernandes is getting on the ball and trying to do things, and so is Mount, but they're almost creating for each other, and then neither of them are out and out forward. So
they've not got that instinct to get into the box at the right time.
And even if they make the run, they're not the sort of players where you expect them to run in behind and then slot a finish in the back of the net. So I think Ten Hag realised that, obviously corrected that in the second half, bringing on Xerxes. And we look better from a creation perspective, but then we lose the press. And once you lose the press, then teams and players pass through us, and then we can see chances. So you've either got to drop Mount and lose that pressing ability, or you've got to drop Xerxes, carry on with this system, and then we don't create enough chances. Either way, Bruno Fernandes is a fantastic FPL option, and I will argue that to the high heavens that he is a player that will get chances and he will convert them eventually. My worry is without a Xerxes or a Højlund, the players that he creates chances for are less likely to finish them. Rashford, again, not a great finisher traditionally. Ahmad, I think, is a fantastic footballer, but not a clinical finisher. Garnacho, we've seen already, will get chances, but again, not clinical. And Bruno himself, I wouldn't say is a particularly prolific or clinical finisher either. No. So you've got a team of players that will miss chances, including himself. So no, he will not always perform at his XG level. So you can't always point to XG, but I will do so anyway, and just say that he has the second highest XGI over the first two. So what we mean by that is he's creating chances and getting chances. And I think you can count yourself so unlucky across the first two to not have at least one or two returns. So Bruno, for me, is fine to keep. The issue is they're playing against Liverpool, who we'll discuss in a second, have been so good defensively, and he's so much money. You can get Smith Rowe for like 3 million cheaper. Yeah. You can get Rodgers for 3.5 million cheaper. It's difficult to continue justifying Fernandes. So I think if I had 2 free transfers and no other issues, believe it or not, I wouldn't talk anyone out of transferring out. But if it was my team, you've only got 1 free transfer or you've got other issues in your team, removing an asset that is getting that number of chances doesn't feel like the best idea for me. And I feel like even once Xerxes comes in, I still feel like Manchester United will still perform, and so will Bruno Fernandes.
Yeah. Okay.
And the only other player I wanted to mention was Garnacho. He's played 54 minutes and has the second highest XG in the league. I mean, he is fluffed to humongous chances. Yeah. Obviously, very unlucky with his assist/goal where Xerxes blocked it on the line. Once Garnacho's starting, I think he's one of the best 6.5 million midfielders by some distance, regardless of fixtures. I think Garnacho is arguably our best attacker to invest in from an FPL perspective. But I am worried why he isn't playing more minutes because he looks fit enough to start now. So why is he not? Even Game Week 3 is back in the starting 11. Maybe from Game Week 4, I would consider him. But as of right now, until he gets a start, I don't think you can look there personally.
No, I don't think so. And I completely agree. Start of the season, Garnacho is a player that's very interesting to us all.
Yeah.
When he starts games, until we know who he's coming in for as well, whether that's going to be Ahmad, whether it's going to be Rashford, if Rashford keeps performing at the level we're seeing at the moment, it could easily be a combination of Garnacho and Diallo on either wing. Yep. So, yeah, it's a wait and see for me, unfortunately, especially with Liverpool up next. The caveat is, as a Bruno owner, I'm looking at Game Week 4 as a Southampton fan and thinking, yeah, he's exactly the sort of player who's going to carve us open a number of times. So maybe I'm holding on a little bit too much hope and maybe negative bias against Southampton there. But yeah, I'm tempted to just hold on to him because it would be so Bruno if he scores against Liverpool.
Yeah, and Man United will still create some chances, so he's going to be involved at the heart of that. So anyway, most of you probably aren't considering Man United assets, but I would say Brighton from that game were the ones to look for. Yeah. But maybe from Game Week 4 onwards, and we'll discuss them obviously in the Game Week 4 episode in more detail. Palace West Ham was the next game. Super disappointing. I mean, I own Henderson and Eze. Some people have Henderson, Munoz, and Eze. As of right now, you have no Palace.
True. Yeah, correct.
And I feel like if you've told me that going into Game Week 1, I would have said mistake, but that's worked out for you. Eze is doing everything but return points. Very similar vibe to Bruno Fernandes. 12 shots in the opening 2 game weeks, which is the joint most in the league. 4 chances created in Game Week 2 alone. We're feeling incredibly hard done by. You're feeling very happy, but also worrying that moving forward. I mean, if you had Eze now, there's no way you remove him, right?
Absolutely not. No, he would be one of the players I'd be absolutely determined to keep hold of at this point. I mean, the next 3 fixtures are absolutely fine. Chelsea, okay, on paper is a tough fixture, but we saw how they performed against Wolves. They're still open. It's still very free-flowing, and they will get caught out at the back. So I think Eze, it is a matter of time before he starts returning, and I am so scared as a non-owner because it will happen for him. He's far too good and creating far too many chances, not only for himself, but also for others as well. So yeah, Eze's one of the first players that I look towards and like, has he done anything? No, okay, I'm safe, fine. So yeah, very jealous of Eze owners at the moment. I would not be selling.
No, I would agree with that. And I think defensively, moving on, they've looked vulnerable, but I also think slightly unlucky. Game state dependent in game week 1. If that Eze free kick goes in, it's a completely different game, and I think they dominate from there. And I think it was poor substitutions from Glasner, believe it or not, because I think he's a top manager, that let them down in game week 2. So I think you could look at this and say Henderson's having a stinker. Well, you need to remove him. But I think, number one, it's very early to make a goalkeeper switch. I mean, last year, did you start the season with Pickford last year?
No. Who did I start with? It wasn't Pickford.
But do you remember Pickford? He blanked for like 8 games in a row. We all removed him, and then he kept the second most clean sheets in the league. Mm-hmm. And this can happen. So I'm not saying that you keep Henderson for the rest of the season because he might do a Pickford. But what I'm saying is that I think it's a bit early to make a goalkeeper switch right now, as good as Raya does look, and we'll move on to Raya. For me, unless your team is perfection, but even so, I'd be more tempted to roll and use those transfers on the attack and decide if you want to switch around Haaland and Salah. And it just feels like low upside bringing in a goalkeeper.
Absolutely. Especially at 4.5.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not looking around at any other 4.5 keepers thinking they are take a clean sheet to the bank right now.
Yeah.
If you've got $1 million spare and you can get to Raya, then maybe slightly more tempting.
Yeah.
But outside of Raya right now, no keeper is really covering themselves in too much glory. So Palace, as good as any defensively at 4.5, I would probably just hold on to it and hope that it turns around eventually.
I think losing Anderson's a big loss, so that might affect them. And also, it looks very unlikely now that Gay will go to Newcastle. But if that also happens, then yeah, this is a different conversation and we panic.
For sure.
Another defender to discuss, actually, Munoz. If you watch football, which I'm sure most of you do, and you are eye test based, looks great, right? You're like, wow, he's in some advanced positions. And so when I was typing up the notes for this episode, I was like, Munoz looks great again. Looked into the data, nothing. Yeah. So he had 0 crosses, 0 shots, 0 key passes. Nothing decisive about his game. So he's getting into the advanced positions. I'm not just going to say standing there because that's really critical of him and it's not his fault, but players can look very good and look very advanced without doing much. So him being in an advanced position is one thing, but he needs to do more of what we saw in game week 1, which is get into the box and get on the ball. And so I'd be very happy keeping Munoz, but at 5 million, it's expensive. Considering some of the 4.5s like Robinson, who we'll discuss in a second, look fantastic with 4.6 now. I wouldn't hold Munoz indefinitely just because he looks very advanced. So it would worry me a little bit, but I guess we've not seen quite enough over the opening 2.
Yeah, I'd say with Munoz, it is a case of when, not if, for him as well. I think eventually the chances will fall to him. He was even quite frustrating last season where he was at the back post quite a lot. The cross would come across from Mitchell and it just wouldn't make it to him. And I think we're seeing a bit of that this season. Mitchell looks very advanced down the left. If you look at the territory maps in the first couple of game weeks, Mitchell's actually the one that actually almost looks more like a classic winger rather than anything else, whereas Munoz is just ducking in at the back post, hoping to get on the end of those crosses. And in game week 1, although it hasn't registered as a cross itself, he did get the assist for, I think, heading it back across goal, and then they bundled it into I think it was Pinnock, wasn't it? Bundled it into the back of the net. So I think with Munoz for now, I'd probably wait and see, but he would have a shortening lifespan based on, okay, if he continues not to receive the ball in those areas, then he's not exactly a fantastic asset. Yeah. You would think that Glasner will find a solution for that, though, and I think eventually we'll see them find a way to get Munoz the ball in those advanced positions. I
would agree with that. And it's very boring to say this, but I think you'll quickly realise already that Sam and I are kind of like wait and see with a lot of players because two game week sample is so few. As we said at the start, like I don't know if it was game state dependent, if it was opposition dependent, if they're just taking a while to ease in. It's not until game week 3, game week 4, and this is why game week 6 wildcard, which we'll discuss later, is so popular. 5 game weeks of data feels really good to start making decisions based off, whereas 2, anything could happen still. It could flip on its head in game week 3. It's not that I'm ignoring West Ham because I'm about to move on to the next game. It's more so that they've got City in game week 3. Yeah. So this isn't the entry point for them, regardless of who you're bringing in. But if you do own, I wasn't impressed with West Ham necessarily in game week 1, but West Ham were being talked down massively by pundits and saying Aston Villa were exceptional and West Ham were terrible. I thought West Ham were okay in game week 1. I didn't see massive issues. Yep. I also think that at points they did limit Aston Villa, especially in that second half. And obviously, to keep Palace out, I know there was a bit of luck there and also a couple of good saves, but I kind of feel like West Ham might go back to being a very decent defence. Yeah. So the likes of Areola could be good at some point. I think Kilman was exceptional, always very good for bonus points. And Bowen back on the score sheet was nice to see as well. Souček, by the way, had the most shots in the box in game week 1, get us on the score sheet in game week 2, we could see a Soucek of old starting to pop up. Was it like 2022 when he went on that crazy run?
Yeah, he was a lot of fun to own back then as well, because everyone was underrating him as this defensive midfielder, and he became that chaos merchant in the box.
Like Fellaini.
Yeah, like Fellaini, exactly. That a great Man United reference there. But yeah, so hopefully Lopetegui will see him in a similar sense, and we've got ourselves a cut price midfielder on our hands that actually is getting into the box late on. Obviously always going to be a menace from corners and set pieces, but it's whether or not we see that consistently enough, and we can easily predict which matches they're going to come from, because those kind of players, they could pop up with a goal from a corner against Man City, obviously coming up next, but you're just never going to predict that to happen. So whilst these players are very exciting, they almost need to be, they're always sat there ready to help you out. You don't know which game week it's going to happen in. And it's a bit of James Ward-Prowse, and obviously he's not getting in the side at the moment, but I never like owning those players because I can never predict accurately which games I can trust them to get a return in. And with Soucek, it could happen
Good
whenever.
to sit on the bench, I guess, but not where you're allowed. I would agree. I think still Rodgers, who we'll move on to in a bit, but Rodgers would still be streets ahead of someone like a Soucek for me, probably.
Yeah, same.
So next game, Fulham-Leicester. Obviously, lots of us went in with double or triple Fulham. I went in with double, which was Robinson and Muniz. So if you want to know, if you want some copying for Muniz, if you own him and you want to feel a little bit better about owning him, so I brought him in for Solanke in game week 2, obviously due to Solanke's injury. And I saw the blank. Obviously, Smith Rowe gets a 10 points, and I'm like, 8 points more for Smith Rowe. That's frustrating. I kind of want to remove Muniz already. But I looked into it. He got the chances. And if you watch the game, it's all about getting the ball to Muniz and feed him. He was very much the focal point. So he managed 7 shots in game week 2, which was the most shots in game week 2, which you can feel great about that or not. All of which were in the box, by the way. So often I'll say this player had 25 shots. And it's like, yeah, but they were from 40 yards out. Muniz had 7 shots in the box. He also created 2 chances himself. And so I feel like, yes, Muniz did blank, and that was one of the better fixtures. But in the name of what we do on this podcast and how I play the game, I don't just go based off FPL points. And I look at that performance. He's performed well. He's getting in the positions. His minutes were still good. About 80 minutes he got again, subbed off for Raul Jimenez, and he got the chances. So I think overall I'm pretty happy. My only concern would probably be longer term Raul Jimenez maybe getting minutes ahead of him. But I don't see a start for Jimenez at the moment based on Muniz's performance. If he continues to struggle to score, absolutely. But as of right now, I still think Muniz is a very solid pick at that price. And I still prefer him to someone like a Chris Wood, who again, we'll discuss a bit later, because I think his minutes are still a bit more secure. But overall, I'm very happy with Muniz. The player that we both own, Anthony Robinson, very, very impressive. 7-pointer. And we said that assists would come, but maybe not every week. But it feels like every week he'll have the chance.
Yeah.
He's got some of the highest expected goal involvement for all defenders. But the thing that I love about him is his baseline bonus is really good. And if you want to know what baseline bonus is, it's basically their level of bonus points in the system before you add the decisive actions, such as a goal, an assist, and a clean sheet. So without any attacking returns or clean sheets, he's very high up the bonus point system. So if you chuck an assist, goal, or clean sheet in there, he's got a very good chance of a bonus point. So I think Robinson is by far and away the best sub 5 million defender at the moment. I would just say the fixtures start to run out very soon for Fulham. So if you didn't have Robinson right now and you were looking for a defender, with the fixtures coming up, I think Ipswich, West Ham, Newcastle, would you still be looking at that, or do you think you've missed the boat?
I don't think you've missed the boat. I think it depends on your wildcard window. So some of us have kind of booked in a wildcard around game week 5 or game week 6. I think if you're looking at wildcarding in the next few weeks, Robinson is still probably the pick. I think if you're looking slightly longer term, your attention starts to divert to Aston Villa, who will come onto it, I'm sure, but have a good 4.5 million option, but also potentially a good 4 million option there too. Yeah. So I do like Robinson. I think that he will outscore the likes of Konza over the next few game weeks based on how advanced he is, and maybe we can assume there'll be a clean sheet in there as well. Yeah. Konza is very much just your classic meat and potatoes, 4.5 million defender, 6.2 points, 6.2, you would hope. So I would always attack the upside there. And that's why I think Robinson would come in ahead of a Konza for me if I was picking right now. I
agree. I think if you were to ask me next week, going into game week 4, I think at that point you're starting to look at, now you've only got the West Ham game, then it's Newcastle, clean sheet unlikely, probably, although they've not been great. But then, I think you start to get to points. So I think this is probably the best last entry point for Robinson.
Agreed.
But also, if you're not starting him every week, then the overall fixtures don't matter. It depends on the rotation in your team. But I still think there are a few questions around Anthony Robinson, and I still feel like he's an absolutely great player to bring in. You obviously had Smith Rowe for his 10-pointer. So Smith Rowe and Andreas are playing very similar roles, which we didn't expect. We expected Andreas to play a slightly more defensive role, almost like a hybrid between a 6 and an 8. So like a defensive midfielder that gets forward a little bit. And we expected Smith Rowe to play as the number 10. I would say what we're seeing is more as like 2 8s. So they're both playing almost like box-to-box-ish midfielders. They both get forward. If Andreas pushes forward, Smith Rowe drops a little bit. And if Smith Rowe pushes forward, Andreas drops a little bit. My overall impression is Andreas will get tons more assists because he's on set pieces and he's creating from certain positions, especially in that sort of, I'll call it the Kevin De Bruyne role, where he's in midfield but drifting out right a little bit, where Trent loves to whip those passes and crosses in. But Smith Rowe he's got that like Gerard Lampard vibe where he arrives in the box at the exact time when the ball gets cut back or someone whips in across. So if I had to guess now, Smith Rowe gets comfortably more goals than Andreas, unless Andreas is on pens, which he could be. And I think Andreas gets more assists. So I definitely think Smith Rowe still feels like the better asset to own. But if Andreas does stay, and we'll know before the Game Week 3 deadline, he becomes a player again that we could potentially look at.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the set pieces really helps with Andreas. And also not just the set pieces, but the players that he's trying to pick out now as well from those open play crosses. So Smith Rowe, like you said, does have a very good eye for goal. We know that from his several bench appearances for Arsenal over the years. He always seemed to be inevitably coming in and getting a clutch goal in the last 10 minutes. And I don't think after this many years, you can call that a coincidence anymore. I think he is a player that knows for, okay, I need to drop 5 yards now because the ball's going to cut back across. And not every player has that instinct. I think he does. And I think they'll have a really good partnership if Andreas stays. I think they'll both get good points.
Yep.
And there's potentially even an argument when their fixtures are great to possibly even have both of them. I think the problem is there are actually now 4 Fulham assets that are actually really good value for money, including Muniz and including Robinson. So it probably does end up being a one or the other. Because do you really want 2 Fulham midfielders in your side? There's just so many good options. So I think based on the fact that, like you say, Smith Rowe seems like the more goal hungry of the 2, he's probably the one to go for, especially with the way the bonus points are weighted this season.
Absolutely.
But Andreas is still a good pick, and he'll still create tons of chances. If he gets a few penalties as well, then you could go against the grain, and Andreas might end up being the one.
Yeah. I think Fulham are a team that they might not finish in a particularly high position in the Prem, although they could, but overall they're going to be definitely FPL assets that we want to consider. Sure. And I think that's not even mentioning the fact that they've signed Anderson and Sanderberg, who will really strengthen their defence up quite a lot. Yeah. And it could become a stage where they are pushing to be more like a Brighton or an Aston Villa or a Newcastle. And if they are pushing the top 10, then we reconsider their options, because at that price, then we probably will have 2 or 3 all season. Leicester didn't trouble Fulham much. There's no real FPL interest for me at the moment. That's no disrespect to Leicester. I just think, given the other teams that are performing, the prices that we have available, Wout Faes obviously got on the score sheet, which is amazing if you had to start him. But overall, I don't look at Leicester and particularly fancy their assets. I mean, Jamie Vardy will score goals, of course, but I think they're a better asset. So moving on to Man City, obviously 4-1 against Ipswich. Got PTSD. So a Haaland's hat-trick, I think something that I want to say is Haaland looks much better than last season for me, especially at the start of the year. He looks back to his first season in the Prem when we were like, oh my Lord, we've got a player on our hands here. And I'm not saying he was bad last season, but that there is something to be said about the way that he looks on the pitch. And that's not a data thing. You can ignore data. He just has that smile, that hunger, that sharpness.
Lean as well, doesn't he?
He does. The mentality, the physicality, like everything looks there with him. And he said on 2 or 3 occasions now he feels it better than he ever has. So there is something to be said there that data won't capture. So very sharp, finishing brilliant. Apart from that header, he's taken all of his chances very well. And he could have had more. He absolutely could have. The header, if that had gone in, and I don't know if anyone watched KDB's goal, but KDB, the ball popped to him on the edge of the box with an open goal, and Haaland swung his right foot back to say, like, basically tap it in, but De Bruyne was just in front of him. If De Bruyne is 1 yard away from that, then Haaland scores another goal. So there is a world in which there could have been 5 or 6 goals in that game, but also he did only accumulate 1.01 XG outside of the penalty.
Sure.
So I think 3 goals is fair. I don't think any more. I think any more would have been a little bit unfair to non-owners. But absolutely, when you've got a hungry Haaland that's scoring goals for fun, he doesn't need many chances to convert them. He only needs a couple of. I mean, his third goal is hat-trick. I mean, that's going to be a very low XG chance. Yeah. But he's good enough to finish that on a consistent basis. So, I mean, there's no more to say about Haaland other than he looks fantastic. If you own him, you definitely don't sell. I would love to have him in. And people will say have Haaland and Salah. It just becomes difficult then to squeeze in Son, Saka, Palmer, Trent, Porro. There are loads of other good options scoring points. So We'll see how it goes over the next few weeks, but Haaland looks very good at the moment. Another player that looks good, Savinho.
Yeah.
What a player he looks like, because he's not very Pep. In fact, he's like Doku, where he's got too much flair. It's like Grealish when he first came from Aston Villa to City, when we're like, oh my God, so much flair. Is Pep going to coach that out of him? Or
yes. He's going to hammer it out of him in the space of months. So we've got a few good months of him yet.
I did see, though, if you know, I think it was Luke from Scout, Luke Disabled, but it could be someone else. Someone was discussing that Pep this season is setting up in a way now where he's wanting more one-on-one situations from his wingers. Now, I am not a tactical enough person. I don't necessarily watch enough of Man City in this much detail. But if it does become a situation where Pep wants to isolate the fullbacks, and instead of playing this system-based approach, what we see with Maresca, where players are expected to cut back, pass a little bit more, and he is telling the likes of Doku, Grealish, Savinho to attack the fullbacks and get after them and cut the ball back, it could be that Doku and Savio get more minutes, and as a result, they become FPL options. But there are so many options that they can play in those positions. With Ilkay Gundogan signing, it could be Bernardo Silva and Foden are pushed back out to the wings. We do have Grealish still as well. So there will be interest at some point, absolutely. But for me, probably not right now. Rico Lewis.
Yeah.
Unlucky owners, because you brought him in. Obviously, they only conceded the one chance, which Schmodic scored. Fantastic finish, by the way. And Rico Lewis missed a huge chance. If you didn't see it, it was from about the penalty spot. He just twatted this ball as hard as he could at the crossbar. I mean, he hit it so much harder than he needed to, but a massive chance. Shot in the box. There wasn't many players closing him down. Another day that goes in, he maybe gets bonus points. And if that one chance doesn't come in, I know there's ifs, buts, and maybes, but you could have been coming away with a 12 to 15 pointer there. So I still think he's great. Do you think he'll persist with Rico Lewis? Because at the moment he's playing Gvardiol as a centre-back, essentially, with Rico Lewis inverting and playing quite high. I don't think Gvardiol does the role as well as Rico Lewis. I think Rico Lewis is probably better at that. And you would argue that Gvardiol is absolutely fine in comparison to someone like a Walker defensively. So do you think he continues to persist with Rico Lewis and Gvardiol? Or do you think Walker comes back in and then that pushes Gvardiol further forward? What would be, obviously no one can predict Pep, but what is your instinct watching City?
I'll give it my best shot.
Yep.
So I think there's not a black or white answer here. I think it'll be somewhere in between. Okay. I think in certain matches we'll still see Walker get minutes. Obviously, transfer window's still open. If he goes before the end, then I'm much more convinced that, okay, they see Lewis as ready for right now constantly. But I think it's much more likely that we see a balance where in any given game we could see Walker come in and play that more withdrawn role where Gvardiol goes and Lewis comes out of the side. Now at 4.5 million, he's going to be a good option. And I think this is more of a coming of age year for him than we've seen before, because he is now, even just looking at him on the pitch, you see that he's ready. Like, he's getting into those areas. He's got so much confidence. He's so natural to the system.
Yeah.
But you don't just bin off someone like Walker and give him no minutes if he's still at the club. So I think we'll probably see somewhere in between the two where, depending on the game state and the match that they're playing, you might see Walker come in for a little bit more solidarity at the back. And maybe if you've got someone who's a pacey winger who could catch him on the break, let's say against Nottingham Forest, they've got Hudson-Odoi or something, you might see Walker play that more withdrawn role because they're more worried about the left-hand side or their right-hand side. And Walker obviously is one of the fastest right-backs in the league for that issue to be solved. So I think we'll see a mixture, but Lewis will get good minutes. It's just trying to predict which matches he's going to play in just is putting me off just a little bit at the moment.
Yeah, so maybe it's one of those where you can have him as an option, but you don't want him as a starting defender that you have to rely on every week, where your only backup is 2 4s. Yeah. It needs to be as rotating with another 1 or 2 cheaper defenders.
Agreed.
But if Walker does leave, or if it just appears that he continues to persist where Rico Lewis becomes first choice, then 4.5 million is a joke of a price.
Yeah.
Question then, is Gvardiol worth 6 mil in this role where we're not sure if he's playing left centre back or left back, or do you think he'll still get forward a bit? He's good for bonus. He'll get the clean sheet still, because you're talking about the same price as Gabriel, Saliba, cheap, obviously more expensive than Porro, only slightly less than like Ben White. And then I know that it's $1 million, but Trent only $1 million more. Robertson, who I've not even discussed, looks fantastic. Is Gvardiol still like one of the better sixes, or are you going off him slightly based on this position?
So I'll go out on a limb here and say that if we're talking about Gvardiol in the space of FPL where there are other 6 million options, right now he's not. And that is because he's playing that more withdrawn role, and City is still finding a way to concede most weeks. So if you're not getting those at least the potential for attacking returns from Gvardiol. It's not that he himself is a bad option, because he's still obviously going to tick along very nicely and City will keep clean sheets. But you've got other 6 million options who right now are much better on the underlying data going forward and also keeping clean sheets at the back. So I think it's more about what you can get for 6 million rather than whether or not he himself is a good option. And I think right now, honestly, there are probably other 6 millions I prefer to have in the side. If that flips and he starts playing that more advanced role again, then again, I reserve the right to change my opinion.
No, you're not allowed to change your opinion as a content creator. That's it. You can't own Gvardiol all the season now.
Oh, no.
I would agree entirely. As of right now, I would rather have an Arsenal defender and or Robertson, Trent, etc. But it could change very quickly. Just to say briefly, if you brought in Foden, massively unlucky, because it wasn't that he was going to miss out. It was actually illness. And Foden gets ill a hell of a lot, by the way. It seems he always misses out due to illness. But yeah, that's just really unfortunate. You would expect that he comes back for game week 3 unless we hear something otherwise. So as of now, you keep him, and very unfortunate because I am 90% sure he was in line to start in game week 2. It looked like the start of the line for him to have a start. Although with Savinho being back now, they do have the option to obviously play Doku and Savinho, and then they do have someone like Bernardo Silva, Gundogan, Kevin De Bruyne. They do have a lot of options. So right now, I wouldn't bring in Foden, especially as you've missed that Ipswich game. But I think you're fine if you own him, just to keep him a little bit longer. Just very briefly on Ipswich, I don't know what to feel, because I've watched them in both games and I was impressed at some parts, but they're very naive in others. And I think that shows that they've just come from League One to the Championship to the Prem. But Schmodix looks fantastic. I'm going to ask you a second about him, because obviously you probably would have watched more Championship football than me last season with Southampton. So Schmodix, a player that looks brilliant, took his chance so well. Only 6 million as a midfielder. And then Leif Davis, it's just... The points are coming so soon. He's had the most final third touches for Ipswich out of all players, which is ridiculous considering he's playing as basically a left back / left wing back. I still think from game week 3 onwards now, with their fixtures coming up, I really think Leif Davis could be good value at 4.5. But lots of people ahead of the pod, when I asked for questions, were asking about Schmodix.
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay, sorry.
That's how the commentators pronounce it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Schmodix, you probably watched a bit of Championship football. Impressed? Is he a Championship striker, or do you see him as someone that could score goals in the Prem?
He could score goals in the Prem, for sure. I don't think he's going to be your classic, like, Grant Holt. He can only cut it in the Championship.
What a reference, yeah.
Yeah, I know. That's throwing it back a bit, isn't it? But yeah, I see him as a player that is ready for Premier League football. He's been a consistent performer in the Championship for not just last season, but for a number of seasons now. So I see him as a player that can take that step up. For me, it's more about positioning. He didn't play as an advanced role as I was expecting him to. I thought he'd be competing directly with Delap in the first appearance, and that didn't seem to be the case at all. So I'd be slightly more nervous about where he's deployed at Ipswich, but that's not to say he's not a good option. He's still playing relatively out of position, even if he is just in behind Delap.
Okay.
And actually, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he did take that centre-forward role at times too. So 6 million for an out-of-position midfielder. I think if the fixtures are good, then he's someone you could definitely look at. Okay. I think it's too soon for me, though, to say reliably that he's going to be a better asset than some of even the 5.5s or the 5 million midfielders that we have at our disposal. So I hate to say it, because we're going to say it a lot on this pod, but it is a wait and see for me right now. And if he does continue to play those advanced roles and his eye for goal continues in the Premier League, like we've already seen, then he could be a very good option.
Okay. Perfect. I've got my eye on Ipswich. I think they've impressed. I know that's crazy to say, but they have impressed me at points.
They're brave.
And playing against Liverpool and City to start the season is not easy. So big respect to them, and hopefully we start to see some of their assets perform. So next one is Southampton Forest. We'll start flying through some of these now, especially because we've got a Southampton fan here. But on Forest, very briefly, Gibbs White looks much better than in game week 1. Created 3 chances, had 4 shots, much more integral to their play. So that's more of what we expect from Gibbs White, and I would expect that to be the sort of performance you would get from him, rather than what we saw in game week 1 when he really struggled against Bournemouth. I was actually very disappointed with Chris Wood again. I think Awoniyi comes in very, very soon. Chris Wood's minutes were never going to be particularly secure. It looks like the Nketiah deal's fallen through for Forest, and as of right now, looks like Palace are more likely to get him. So that's one less possibility, but I just think Awoniyi's too good to not start, and Chris Wood's doing nothing for them. The hold-up play is not overly good. I know he scored the tap-in, but he's relying on winning aerial duels and scoring tap-ins, and I just don't feel like that's the way they want to play, especially considering Awoniyi is a physical guy himself. He can surely do that, plus running behind, plus score goals. So if you've got Chris Wood, I probably expect him to get Wolves at home but I think he could be benched, and I think from game week 4 onwards, I think you've got maybe potentially a slight issue. I know some people have Ola Aina really gutting that obviously Moreno came in. He got a 9-pointer in game week 2, by the way, which was brilliant. I think Moreno starts at left back for them. They don't spend that money if they're not going to start Moreno at left back. But it could be that Aina goes out to right back and Williams drops out. I would say if you've got Ola Aina, you keep him for now. But it could become an issue, whereas if they prefer Nico Williams at right back and they prefer Moreno at left back, unfortunately, there's nowhere left for him to play. So I still think he's a fine pick, but maybe not longer term, dependent upon the situation in defence. So then, that's very quickly Nottingham Forest. Push you to Southampton. I'll give you a few minutes because I know you could spend hours talking about it. So Southampton had the lowest XG in game week 2.
Yeah.
Really, probably so far, the weakest side we've seen probably across the opening 2 games, maybe in line with, I would say, Wolves. And so what do you think of Southampton? What do you make of it? Are they just a bad team in the Premier? Are you going to go immediately down, or do you think it's sort of fixture dependent?
Yeah, so I am concerned straight away. The style that Russell Martin brings with him wherever he goes is quite a brave style, but it's very possession focused. And against Nottingham Forest, I think we just played straight into their hands. I think what has happened in the first 2 game weeks, we were lulled into that false sense of security after playing what was a fairly decent game against Newcastle for 60 minutes against 10 men. And although we got off to a good start in that game, the first 30 minutes, as I was discussing with you before this pod, you're a newly promoted club. You've got all the bravery in the world because you've been winning games for a year. You are going to go at them and you are going to have that high intensity. So I think if we had seen the remaining 60 minutes against 11 men, we might have seen a drop-off. Yep. And maybe that would have done us some good in this game where it's a bit of a reality check. Russell Martin probably looks around and thinks, okay, maybe I shouldn't have 2 central midfielders beyond the ball at all times, which we deployed against Nottingham Forest, where we had Flynn Downs, who is fantastic, but sat in that 6 role completely isolated with players like Elanga, Hudson-Odoi, Morgan Gibbs-White running at him and just completely overwhelming him, whereas Aribo and Smallbone were too advanced in the first half. And then second half, we tried bringing in Walker-Peters or Sugawara on either wing to sit alongside Downs. And this might be over-egging in terms of complication, but it just did not quite look fluid to us. And just watching the game for the 90 minutes, we never really sat well on the ball. We were always slightly nervous in possession. And importantly, we'll come on to the strikers. They were both playing far, far too wide. Yeah. Brereton Diaz on the left and Armstrong very wide on the right. And eventually we just needed to switch something up and get off one of them to bring on a more central focal point. Never looked comfortable though.
So I think all eyes on the Brentford game.
Sure.
If you're naive again and don't fix those mistakes, it's the fixture to target. Whereas maybe if we see Martin fix those mistakes and maybe try a slightly different system and you look a bit better against Brentford, then maybe we need to look ahead to game week 4. But I think, if it's another game where you're being exposed in those weaknesses, then sadly the fixture to target.
Yeah, agreed.
Brereton Diaz played 90 minutes. Armstrong played 71 minutes. Is that something? So there will be some people that own Brereton Diaz and be looking at this and going, great. But there will also be some people that own Armstrong, as is yourself. Is this something you expect going forward, or do you think it's game state dependent?
I think because we've now got 2 strikers of that quality, very similar qualities, I would expect, depending on how they're both individually performing in the game and also how we're performing in the game, whether they're getting into central areas or not. Yep. The weaker of the 2 in that game will get taken off first. So in this one, Armstrong was, even on the eye, performing well below his ability, whereas Brereton Diaz was at least getting on the ball and getting into pockets a little bit more. And I think we just needed to sacrifice one of them to get Archer through the middle. Yep. I don't think it will be a consistent thing where it's always Armstrong 70, 80 minutes. I think it will change week to week, and that's frustrating for owners like myself because maybe one week Armstrong gets the full 90 and Brereton Diaz comes off early. But I think we can quite safely assume at least one of them will come off early in most game weeks, unless things are going really well, which looks fairly unlikely at this point.
Okay, fair enough. Cool. So there you go. There's some Southampton information for those of you that maybe have one of their assets. Probably none of you have 2, unless you're...
sorry.
So Spurs, Everton, I mean, this was just a great performance by Spurs, and Everton looked poorly again, but Maddison looks so good at the start of the season. He often starts the season well and then tails off due to injury or just a lack of consistency, but he's had the second highest expected assist in game week 1 and 2, only behind Trent, and he's absolutely a player I've got my eye on. Newcastle and Arsenal in the next 2 for Spurs means that I probably wouldn't move now, but someone that at that price, the same sort of price as Jota and Gord, he could absolutely rival them if he can keep that level of performance up. I think Son was so good as the number 9, but Everton were also very poor. And without the Pickford mistake, it's 1 goal. I still think Son was fantastic, but I think a large part of that was Everton are just all over the place at the moment. And obviously all eyes on Solanke's fitness, because if he's back soon, Son's back out on the left. And whilst he can perform on the left, we know that he's slightly better through the middle, and we still don't know who's on penalties between the two of them. So all of that will influence our thinking. But generally, I was very, very impressed. A lot of people will be looking, as a Son owner, do you maybe move to Palmer now? So I know this is a very difficult thing to discuss, because it's not one way or the other very easy. But if you own Son right now and you had a free transfer and you had the money, would you move to Palmer, or do you think you'd give Son the Newcastle game?
I would be quite tempted to give him the Newcastle game if Solanke's not back. I think if Solanke's not back, then he's through the middle again. Spurs did set up quite regularly with Son through the middle last season, so it's not like a brand new system to them where they're trying to work it out as they go. It seems fairly natural to them. And obviously, again, that secures the fact that Son is definitely on penalties. Although I'd still give him like a 90-95% chance of being on them, even with Solanke on the pitch. I think if Solanke's back in, and I think as it stands, it looks fairly unlikely he will be, then Palmer is looking more and more enticing. I would probably be tempted to make the move if you have no other problems.
I agree.
But not many teams have no problems right now. There's going to be something that just needs sorting out sooner than getting rid of an elite striker, elite asset that Son is. So yeah, it's a very, very luxury transfer that if you've got nothing else going on, then I'd probably make peace with.
Yep, I would agree with that. I think that's it on Spurs, really. Just, keep an eye on Maddison. Son, I think you'll find keeping or selling. You could justify either way. Just a quick note on Everton. They are now, across the first two, the second worst defence and the second worst attack. And obviously the only defence worse than them is Ipswich, and that's because of the teams they've played. You wouldn't look at either of those games for Everton and say they are awful. Brighton and Spurs are good attacks, but I am genuinely worried for Everton as things stand. They've, I think, only got 14 first-team players that are fit at the moment.
Yeah.
It's worrying. So as of right now, it's the fixture to target, along with some of the other newly promoted sides. I wouldn't see Everton as a bad defence. And Bournemouth have them next week, and we'll discuss in a second that Bournemouth have looked pretty good. So as of right now, Everton's a fixture to target, which isn't something I thought I would say. The next game is Villa-Arsenal. Very tricky one to try and analyse, and also how much weighting to give it, because they are both top sides playing against another good side, and it's kind of like, you want to take something from it, but Villa aren't playing Arsenal every week and Arsenal aren't playing Villa every week. But I don't think Arsenal were bad at any point in the game, but they took a while to get going. I was like 60 minutes. I think Gary Neville, it was on comms, was like, are they going to start moving? Like, what's going on here? It was like, it wasn't even like chess. It was just, they were like sussing each other out throughout the game. And at around 60, nothing really happened. I would say it wasn't until that ridiculous Raya save that they really kicked into gear, and that kind of spurred them on to, hang on a second, we've got a game here we need to win.
Yeah.
I mean, let's discuss Raya. I mean, like I say, that 10-pointer. Do you think this is a sign of things to come in terms of Arsenal might be a little bit weaker defensively, he might make more saves, or do you think it's just across the first two and probably from here on in it's more 2s and 6s?
I think if I was being pragmatic, I would assume it's going to go back to 2s and 6s. Okay. The data sample that we've got for this season versus last season, yes, it's looking promising so far, and obviously I'm delighted with the results, but it's more likely that they're going to remain a very solid defence and not concede that many chances. The ideal keeper, what we want, is a defence that's decent, but a lot of smaller XG chances that a keeper can easily collect. Arsenal in the first two game weeks did concede a fair few, even bigger chances, and you would think that Arteta's going to drill that out of them fairly quickly. The next three fixtures, though, if we're still assuming they're a good defence, which of course they are, they will concede shots in all three of these. So
a few more hauls could be there. Yeah.
If things go their way, yeah, they could be looking more at like 8 to 10 points for Raya again, and then throughout the season it'll probably drift off a little bit to the 6 and 2s that we are more accustomed with. Yeah,
so in game week 6, so the next three fixtures is Brighton at home, Spurs away, City away. They then have Leicester at home and Southampton at home after that from game week 6 onwards.
Yeah, not many shots in those.
No, but I think from game week 6, if we see another couple of hauls from Raya, I think he's going to be like the most highly owned goalkeeper in the game by some distance. So all eyes on him. Havertz looked fine again. He actually only had one shot, but it was a big chance. Still think he's great. Saka, Villa managed to limit him largely for most of the game. Yeah. Obviously, apart from the Trossard goal when he did very well against Luka Dean, but Saka's fine. I wouldn't take too much from their performances in this game. I think actually really more people are interested in Villa at the moment. So from game week 3 onwards, Villa have a really nice run of fixtures. It's Leicester away in game week 3. Do you remember the fixtures off the top of your head?
Leicester, Everton and Wolves, isn't it? Both at home.
Oh, look at you,
is that correct?
Expert. Yes, we've got Leicester away, Everton at home, Wolves at home, and then Ipswich away. So
lovely.
I would say they are, maybe ignoring Southampton, the best 4 fixtures you could have based on what we've seen so far.
Yeah.
Wolves and Everton could defend well, we don't know, but over the first 2, they have been 2 of the worst teams, and then Leicester and Ipswich. So you couldn't really hope for 4 better fixtures from Villa. So Morgan Rogers is standing out because I think the thing that stands out to me is that he's played 90 minutes in both games, and when other players have come off, McGinn, Watkins, Bailey, he just moves around the pitch and just plays wherever there is a remaining spot.
Yeah.
I think that is amazing that he's not coming off at any point. And obviously Watkins won't come off every week. Eventually he'll get his fitness back up. And so that's one less person coming up. Once John McGinn's fitness is fully up to scratch, he might not come off as often. So I'm not saying I expect Rodgers to play every game 90 minutes. And obviously once the UCL kicks in, we have another issue there that if he is in their strongest 11, well, they're going to want to do well in the Champions League. So I'm not saying he'll get perfect minutes every week, but it looks really good. But interestingly, his underlying data / actual chances to create and score goals hasn't been there. So is Rodgers still going to be a good FPL option? Ignore the fact he's getting minutes and looks good. Is there some worry there with you that he's not getting those FPL opportunities? Or do you think West Ham and Arsenal aren't great fixtures anyway, and at least he's getting the minutes?
Well, I think there were good signs against Arsenal at the very least. He was happy to take on the likes of Declan Rice, Thomas Partey, and run beyond them. So I think the early signs are encouraging even without the returns. And the data doesn't reflect necessarily what we've seen on the pitch with him.
I would agree.
But as well, even if you put aside the data for a minute, he's a young player, he's improving, and he's got a fantastic coach, hopefully guiding him towards better performances in the future. The fact that Emery is giving him this kind of confidence and this starting berth from the off, I think is very promising. And all of this is caveated with the fact that we're not expecting him to be the next Cole Palmer at 5 million, but he is a 5 million FPL option. So you don't need to start him every single week. He can easily be your 7th or 8th attacker, maybe in a rotation, and he will still probably do you right at 5 million.
Yep.
I think for me, he's a particularly good option if you're looking at wildcarding in 3 or 4 weeks, because for the next few, especially until game week 4 is out of the way, we don't have to worry about the Champions League. I think game week 4 into game week 5 is the first Champions League fixture, right? So at that point, maybe we start rethinking it a little bit. For the next 2 game weeks, though, I think he is, I hate saying the word due, but like he is coming along very nicely. And I think Villa will be a team that will be on an upwards trend for the next 2 game weeks based on a pretty dodgy start in the fixtures. I think we'll see a lot better against Leicester and then against Everton and Wolves as well.
Yeah, FPL feels like much like sliding doors. Is that the name of the film where like these like little things could just change the way that we approach the game completely? Let's say that the Rodgers assist to Watkins, he puts that in the back of the net.
Yeah.
3 things happen. Rodgers all of a sudden gets his return. At 5 million, he's getting all these returns, getting an assist against Arsenal, great, maybe even bonus points. Watkins, all of a sudden, back on the score sheet, converting, he's an amazing forward.
Great data.
And Arsenal aren't the strong defence that we thought they were. Instead, he misses. Rodgers hasn't been getting any returns. Watkins isn't on the score sheet. Arsenal are fantastic defensively. So I just want to say there are fine margins in FPL and football that influence the narrative that we choose. So yeah, I think Rodgers is great. I do think Bailey might still get more FPL returns and more attacking returns, goals and assists, but not for 1.5 million more, and especially considering the lack of minutes. Bailey's minutes, even without UCL, are still sub 80, sometimes even as early as 60 to 65. So for me, I would need Bailey to be getting the same number of minutes and also showing more attacking threat. And as of now, the attacking threat has looked similar and his minutes are poor in comparison to Rodgers. So for me, there's no reason to pay the extra for Bailey over Rodgers. But Watkins is the tough one. So like I said, 2 massive chances. He missed an open goal, 2 open goals. Brilliant save by Raya. And I know Arsenal fans are going to hunt me down if I don't say that. Brilliant from Raya, truly special. But Watkins also had another half of the goal that he could have scored in. So what is going on? And also the subs is the more worrying thing, and the minutes, because 2 chances missed. We said Bruno missed chances, Eze missed chances. That doesn't actually bother me that he's missed the chances, but he's been subbed in the 61st and 64th minute. And I know he had a no pre-season, but at some point it's like, is he not going to get 90 minutes from now on, or do you think it is just genuinely back up to fitness, back up to scratch, and then he'll start getting 90?
I think he'll get closer to 90. So I think we'll be seeing more regularly 80 plus minutes from probably this point onwards, certainly after the international break, unless he picks up an injury away at England duty. I think it's very likely that he doesn't get that many minutes with England, so he'll probably be using that time to build up fitness a little bit more, and he'll probably come back at around game week 4 a much sharper and fitter striker. There is one asterisk I'd add to Watkins, though, and that is the fact that Duran hasn't left.
And he said he's here to stay, didn't he? Celebration, didn't he?
It's all of that. Yeah, exactly. So, again, you're not a striker. Being the selfish striker that Duran is, you want to be starting in the Premier League. He was offered opportunities to start elsewhere, and he's staying at Villa. That says to me that he's been told, you're going to get minutes this season. Now, whether or not that is going to be at the expense of Watkins is possibly still up in the air long term. They could play with both of them. But I think it is at least a question that needs answering in the next few weeks. Is it going to continue to be Watkins off around probably more likely the 80th minute for Duran, or are they going to end up playing in a 2? And maybe that means Rogers is possibly an issue, who's playing in a very advanced 10 role at the moment. Could be a factor. So that's one thing that I'm maybe just monitoring with Watkins. Things will improve, though. The data's still looking good. He's still getting the chances, and his minutes will improve. He's an elite striker. Yeah. Those will go in the net eventually.
I mean, it's such an awful answer because it's not what you come to content creators for, but I think I would say I would have no issue either avoiding or buying him this week. Like I can see justification to go out there and grab him. That's absolutely fine. If you've got an Isak that you want to move on, and we'll discuss Newcastle next, then great. But if you wanted to give him one more week, give him the international break, maybe even wait until the Champions League kicks in, but then you are losing the great fixtures that Villa have coming up. So I could see either working. As of right now, going to move on to Newcastle. I would probably give Isak a little bit longer if it was me, but I think both could equally work well. And if you've got money in the bank to do like Chris Wood up to Watkins, then absolutely that feels like a relatively good move to make. So yeah, I would love to have Watkins. If I was wildcarding this week, he'd definitely be in there for me. But I don't think you need to break your teams now based on what we've seen. And Rodgers for 4 million less, that's a massive saving. So I'd rather just go there. So Bournemouth, Newcastle, very briefly. Bournemouth been quietly very good. 5th for XG over the first couple, and they've not had an easy fixture. Forest are good defensively. Whatever people think they really are, they don't give up many chances. And I know Newcastle aren't the strongest defence recently, but also it's not a great fixture, I should say, on paper. So I think they've done very well thus far. Semenyo's the one that stands out. Joint first for shots with Eze, 12 shots in the opening 2. He's actually top of the league for non-penalty expected goal involvement. So top of all players in the game, Semenyo has had the most chances and created the most. I think he looks absolutely brilliant. The issue is the fixtures coming up really aren't fantastic. And obviously we want to see more of how he plays with Eva Nilsson in the team, who's their new forward that they've signed from Porto. So, by the way, himself, 0.75 XG, 2 shots in the box, 1 big chance. I think Bournemouth have looked really good, and they are a side that I am absolutely going to consider, but maybe not the perfect next few fixtures. Maybe, again, a team, Game Week 6 wildcard.
Yeah.
That's maybe somewhere we look. I think more people are interested in Newcastle, though, and Isak. So I put a tweet out, Isak has been quietly stinking it up. And everyone was like, there's nothing quiet about it. And I get that. But I suppose he has played against 10 men for a large spell.
Yep.
Which does massively impact it. That game could have gone very differently without the red card. And we've just said that Bournemouth are a very good team. So maybe it's a little bit game state dependent. Maybe it will just take a few weeks to get going. But he's actually only had 1 shot on target, which is worrying, even against a 10-man Southampton team. And he's only had 0.26 XG. So this is a player that we all said was essential and is now not really getting chances to score. And you could say, again, Bournemouth were great, but I'll then point to Anthony Gordon, who had tons of chances. 4 key passes himself, 2 shots in the box. So Gordon had lots of opportunities. He had some really good data. So it's not that Newcastle didn't create. It's that at the moment they're struggling to get Isak into the game a little bit.
Yeah. So
how do you feel about Isak? Are you worried? When do we start worrying? Because this is a player 3 weeks ago we said was essential for Game Week 1.
Yeah.
He was literally owned by 99.4% of teams on Twitter when I ran a poll. I mean, that is ridiculous. So he's not suddenly a bad option. But how long do we give him? Because you've got Havertz and Watkins there at similar prices.
I think you give him at least this week. Against Tottenham, you'd expect chances.
Got a great record against Spurs,
He does. And again, even though Tottenham have basically got their first choice back 4 at the moment, you'd still expect chances in behind. And Isak and Gordon are both players that I would expect to benefit from the style of play that Tottenham use. They'll have their their fullbacks bombing on, and Gordon and Isak can both get in behind that high line and exploit those spaces out wide.
Yep.
I think Isak is a player I'm getting very, very slightly nervous about, but nowhere near the point of selling yet. You obviously want to monitor it, but he's a striker who gets 90 minutes every week, especially with Wilson out. He's on penalties, and you did reference 1 shot on target so far, but I think he did still have 5 shots against Bournemouth in the most recent game. So it's not like he's completely disappearing from games yet. I just think that the big chances haven't quite fallen to him as yet. And yeah, again, obviously he was playing with 10 men against Southampton for 60 minutes of game week 1. So I think for me, it is a player I'm happy to hold on to for at least a little while longer. If game week 3 happens and Watkins goes on a stormer, Isak stinks it up again, then game week 4, that's obviously going to be on a lot of people's radar and we're going to have another discussion about it. For now, though, he's got all of the hallmarks of a very good FPL pick, with the data from last season supporting it, even if it hasn't quite happened for him this season. And I just don't want to give that up based on a 2-game week sample size.
I would agree with all of that. I have nothing more to add. I think for me, Isak deserves... You can't go from a player being essential in our teams to 2 bad performances and they're out. And I think it's more of a Newcastle issue than an Isak issue would be the way that I would view it. They're just not finding ways. And that could become an issue over time. But as of right now, give him on Spurs, because Spurs could leak chances. We've seen it before. Just very briefly, Murphy and Hall for me, they're just dead options, I think, both of them now. Murphy's getting hooked way too early, and also Barnes looked very good when he came on. So I think Barnes and Gordon could be starting. In fact, if I had to guess now, I think they could.
I would too, yeah.
So for me, I don't think you need to go out and sell Murphy, but I certainly wouldn't be relying on him for a start in game week 3. And sad, I mean, you own Lewis Hall.
Yeah.
I think he looked actually okay when he came on. I think Newcastle improved slightly, so maybe he gets back in the 11, but you don't want a player that you're not sure is going to start every week. So probably a dead option now himself.
Yeah, he's an option I'm much more concerned about than Isak. So I think because I'm using him in a rotation of him and Robinson, basically, as 2 4.5s as my third defender, I don't think it's an immediate, I have to sell him today.
Yeah.
I am tempted to do it this week with a free transfer, but I think there are other problems that are locked into my starting 11 that I need to sort out first, which I'm sure we'll come on to. I think with Hall, maybe there is a chance he comes back in. I don't like owning players that every week I'm wondering whether or not I see them on the team sheet.
Anxiously searching the team sheet. Yeah, it's horrible.
It's horrible. And yeah, look, he's a young player. He will become first choice for Newcastle eventually and consistently. All the Newcastle fans are adamant on that. Maybe it's just been a little bit too soon. He did have a bit of a stinker against Southampton. He is a young player, though. He'll learn and he will become first choice. I don't know if I can hold on that long, though. Yeah. So I think in the next couple of weeks, he probably will be a sell for me. This week, I can probably just about hold on to him on my bench and not need to rely on him starting.
Yeah. So I think if you need either Hall or Murphy from now on, I think they're sells. But I think if you can put them on the bench, then maybe just assess a little bit longer. Yeah. Because all it needs is an injury to Barnes. And then we say, actually, Murphy probably is in the starting 11 again because Almiron just to struggle with that consistency. So the next game, Liverpool will do, and then we'll finish with Chelsea because we then want to move on to Nkunku replacements because that is obviously going to be a major talking point. Liverpool's looked very, very good again, and they look so good under Slot, as we said at the start. They are comfortably the best defence in the league over the opening 2 by some distance. They actually have only accumulated 0.8 expected goals conceded. City are the second best with 1.5. So we are talking like by some... They've not even accumulated an expected goal conceded yet. So they're actually the only team in the league as well to only concede 1 big chance. So we say Arsenal are fantastic defensively, and I'm not for a second saying I expect Liverpool to be this good the entire season. But based on what we've seen so far, they have been extremely strong defensively. Ipswich obviously did have a chance in the first half, but overall they're not the strongest attack. But we saw they cause City issues, and Brentford are a good team. So it's not. I don't think it's like they've faced 2 of the bluntest attacks in the league or anything like that. So very impressive. And that brings me on to Andy Robertson, who I actually think is going to be one of the best £6 million defenders this season if he continues to start the amount he has. His minutes look better than Trent's. Yeah. Trent's getting the early sub for Bradley, and Robbo's just staying on the pitch. And whilst they could play someone else in that Robbo role, I thought they might play like similar to what we see with Guardiola, where the left back is playing like a left centre back. Robertson's not playing that at all. He's still getting forward a fair amount. So as of right now, Robertson is probably up there with Gabriel, maybe my favourite £6 million defender. And if I were wildcarding this week, I think I'd have Trent, Robbo, and probably Jota or Salah.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And it's lovely to see Robbo back as an option. And he's taking so many corners. He's taking more corners than Trent. Trent's actually not taking all of them. Soboslai even took one ahead of Trent in the in-swinging corner. And Robertson's taken out-swingers and in-swingers. So I just think Robertson in general, if he can stay fit, looks great. And just very briefly for Quansah owners, Konate looked really strong, I thought.
Yeah,
in fact,
had a good game.
Every time every time he won an aerial duel, the commentators were like, oh, he's won a duel. But he did. He looked dominant, but he also looked good with the ball at his feet. And I think the major advantage of Quansah is his composure with the ball at his feet, which Konate doesn't usually have. I thought Konate looked pretty good. Yeah. So I see no world in which Konate comes out now based on those whatever it was, 135 minutes that he's played since he come in, he's looked very, very strong. So I don't think Quansah gets back in now, even if he's fully fit. So unfortunately, I think if you own him, probably, unless Slot comes out and says he wants Quansah back in the 11, maybe, but for now, no. Jota, top of the league for non-penalty expected goals over the first 2 game weeks. Feels like an absolute bargain of an option. Do you have Jota in your team?
I do not.
How do you feel about that then, as someone that doesn't have Jota with the performances we're seeing?
Not great. It is hurting. I need a very big sofa and it's growing by the week. Watching both Salah and Jota without having them is quite a struggle. He has looked fantastic. I do still maintain the hesitation I have with Jota and Luis Diaz to a lesser extent is the fact that they do have those options coming off the bench, and you're not going to sit there and be a Darwin or a Gakpo and just simply not get minutes in the Premier League. So I'm not necessarily saying they're going to compete for starts anytime soon, because both Jota and Diaz are playing very well and absolutely worthy of starting, but we will only see 70 minutes for both of them in most games, I would say, and it's just a decision on whether or not you think that in those 70 minutes, they're still putting up the value of a regular 90-minute person. Yep. And I'm starting to worry that they actually will put up that value, even against Man United. The temptation is there to remove a Bruno for a Jota in less minutes without penalties. He's just so advanced and also has a great eye for goal. He's actually been unfortunate not to get more than he has so far as well. Yep. So yeah. Short answer is yes, I'm terrified. Longer answer is there are other options around that price that I do like, but I'm starting to wonder if it's worth just going for anyway and hoping that 1, he doesn't get injured, and 2, the performances stay as good as they've been and he just maintains that role at the number 9.
Yeah. I'm very happy owning him, and I'm very happy that I went for the double up because I had Salah. There was the temptation to say I won't go Jota as well, but I'm glad I've got the 2 of them. And Liverpool are saving me week on week now. They've all returned in both game week 1 and 2. I mean, also Brentford were fine. I just think Liverpool was so dominant. And Bournemouth is an option I would consider. Plays against your team obviously this week, and we've spoken about there are those frailties in your defence. So I will be interested to see how Mbeumo gets on, and I do think this is a fine entry point for him. I know he's got Spurs and City. I think it is in 4 and 5, but there's still games where you think he could definitely get something. Yeah. And if by the game week 3 deadline, we will know if Tony's staying or going. And I think if he's going, fantastic. I know some people seem to think he'll be better if Tony stays. I think he's just more vital to their attack if Tony goes. And also he's definitely on a bit of penalties because he's such a good penalty taker. Even if they bring in another penalty taker, I still feel like Mbeumo gets them because he scored pretty much every penalty he's taken for Brentford. So yeah, for me, let's wait until the deadline. But if Tony's off, which looks more likely than not, Mbeumo's a really good option at 7 million for me. Cool. So the final game then. We've spoken about these games for so long, but hopefully there's been some value throughout. And then we're going to move on to Nkunku replacements, answering some of your questions, and then obviously our teams as well. Wolves-Chelsea, 6-2 to Chelsea. Slightly flattering. They didn't even accumulate 2 XG, which again, I know people hate expected goals, but basically they converted all of their chances. And I think Wolves were horrific, like really bad.
Yeah,
very bad. And they conceded the exact... Please, if you've not watched the highlights for the Wolves-Chelsea game, go and watch the highlights because it was the exact same goal 3 times in a row in 14 minutes where Palmer gets the ball, no one even bothers to close him down, and then he just passes it to Madueke, who slots it in. Awful keeping, awful defending. I'm really disappointed that Gary O'Neill kept letting it happen because I rate him so highly as a manager. But after the first one, you go... make sure we sort that issue. Yeah. The second one goes in, and maybe it's just like, okay, we now see them repeating it. And then the third one, I'm like, at what stage is he going to address this issue? So, listen, Chelsea were good. They really were, but Wolves were also very bad. Madueke, exceptional. Took his chances well, looked sharp, played 90 minutes. Madueke, when he plays, is an unbelievably talented footballer. Surely he's done enough to keep starting now for Chelsea and get that right wing slot, which moves obviously Cole Palmer into the 10. Yeah. That makes both of them great options. But I do worry that we said surely Nkunku's going to start and he didn't. So I still have my worries that even given that Madueke has been so good and he looks like Chelsea's best attacker outside of Palmer, how do we know that he continues starting? Because you could see Nkunku as the 10, Felix as the 9 or Jackson, or Felix off the left, Nkunku off the left with Palmer on the right, and all of a sudden Madueke doesn't start. So I am still hesitant to recommend him. I wouldn't go there personally, but I still think he's a good option. Cole Palmer, magnificent, right? Yeah. Just such a talented footballer. But 3 assists where if Wolves defended even half decently, he doesn't get that opportunity. So I still think his performance was great, but I don't think you're getting that level of return every single week. Do you think that Palmer, this is genuinely a question I received 4 times on the same, do you think Palmer is essential now? Is he a player that you have to, I know it's crazy, like we've gone from not having him to is he essential, but is he a player now that you would break your teams to go out and sell Saka, sell Salah? You just need to get Palmer in? Because last year, top point scorer, right?
Yeah.
He's unbelievable. So are we going to see a replication of that?
He'll be a very good asset. There's no doubt about that. I think we've gone beyond the point of thinking that, okay, that was a one season thing. He's gonna regress. He will almost certainly repeat it. But there are other ways of playing this game. I don't think he's essential by any means. The likes of Saka didn't have the best game against Aston Villa, but it was a much tougher fixture. And I still think he, at that price point, represents very good value. So you could easily hold on to a Saka and probably across the season match up pretty well to a Palmer for a little bit less. Son, maybe the same argument. You play the fixtures with all of those assets. Yep. And okay, Palmer's got some very good fixtures coming, but until the end of this game week, no one that I've been talking to in the community was really even suggesting it. So I don't think we've gone all the way from, okay, Palmer's just a player we're just pretending doesn't exist for a little while, to he's absolutely essential in one game week. There will be the odd week where he does get a massive haul. I think this one was a bit of a misnomer. It wasn't necessarily repeatable, but he is still a fantastic option. He will be on penalties. He's going to score a lot of points. I don't think he's anywhere near essential at this point, though. It's a nice to have, but he's in that mix with the Sakas and the Sons of the world. I don't think any one of them right now is putting their hands up and saying, it's me.
Yeah.
And none of the others are going to be relevant. I think all of them have definitely good arguments to pick them.
They've all scored a very similar number of points over the first 2 game weeks, right? And Salah's slightly out in front, but he's more expensive. And then Saka, Palmer and Son are all very close to each other. So pick your boys and try and target the fixtures, absolutely. But if I was wildcarding this week, I think I would have Palmer.
If I was wildcarding, I probably would.
Not necessarily worth transferring out the likes of Saka or Salah, I wouldn't say. No. So, sorry, believe it or not, but Nkunku can't cover Palmer, which is something that I tweeted after the game. Believe it or not, Nkunku for formerly and cheaper isn't going to cover Palmer. So let's move on then to Nkunku replacements, because he is dead as an asset now. We probably expect him to start on Thursday in the second leg of their Europa Conference League qualifier. If he doesn't, then maybe you hold on to him and hope that he starts, but it gets to a stage where you're holding on to an asset that isn't getting good minutes, even if he does start, and we're not expecting to start every week. So, I mean, we've talked about all of these players, really. On your screen, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see a little short list that I've put together of players to potentially replace Nkunku with, depending upon your price bracket. And Burma and Eze at 7 million, both great. I think Eze would be a standout option for me as a replacement if you can get there. At 6.5, you've got a few really good options. I've put Matoma, Bailey, Madueke, Soboslai, Doku, Garnacho, Gibbs-White, all of them really decent. Any of the 6.5 stand out to you if you just want to make sort of a straight switch? Obviously, you'd need a little bit of money in the bank now.
Yeah.
But is there any of those 6.5s that stand out to you?
Yeah, I was tempted by Bailey. I think that just the minutes are just slightly too risky, even with the fixtures that, okay, Philogene come back in as well, and he probably wouldn't have come back in if there was no guarantee of minutes. So I think, sadly, with Champions League around the corner, he's not one that I'm that tempted by. I was really impressed with Morgan Gibbs-White against Southampton.
I agree.
Obviously, we didn't play well, but I think that after about 60 minutes, it became very clear that Wood wasn't playing as well as maybe they had hoped, and Morgan Gibbs-White just kept getting more and more advanced and started isolating one of the centre-backs. And I think if that continues, we're going to see a much better set of data, because I think that was one worry going into the season with Gibbs-White, was the underlying attacking data. I think it was about 0.19 for XG and 0.19 for XA as well. Even with penalties, it wasn't the best value. This season, I can see that improving, and I think Nuno is going to get the best out of him. So it seems a bit steady Eddie as a pick, but good fixture this week. I think Morgan Gibbs-White could be the one at 6.5 right now.
Yeah, I think one player that hasn't been mentioned at all today is actually Soboslai. Quietly got 90 minutes in both opening games. Looks brilliant. Path in the eye test, so important to what Slot's doing, and the energy that he has. He's playing as like a centre-back and centre-forward at the same time, as well as, I've seen him track all the way back and then he's somehow breaking the line with his run. So Soboslai for me is absolutely nailed on. I know Elliott's there, and I know they could play Gakpo in that. I just don't see anyone even getting close to playing it as well as Soboslai. And he is making a lot of runs to get in behind. So Salah and Trent might drop a little bit deeper. You might have Jota drop in to get the ball. And it's Szoboszlai that's breaking the lines with those runs. And he is a great runner. We're not talking about a slow player here that can't get in behind. And so I think goals and assists will come for him. So I think my issue is I don't think he's in the best 4 Liverpool assets. I would say for me it's Salah, Jota, Trent, Robbo. I would say I prefer all 4 of them. But if you can't get to them, or you've got 2 of them and you've got this price point available, Szoboszlai could block you in the future from getting a Salah, and that might be frustrating. But as of now, I still feel like in and of himself at 6.5 million, he's a great option, and he's going massively under the radar. It's just, again, once Champions League kicks in, is he going to be preferred in the Champs? Maybe it will be that Elliott's preferred in the Premier League, for example. So Szoboszlai is on my radar, but I've already got triple Liverpool, so I can't go there. And then we've just got the cheaper assets. So Schmodics we've already spoken about. Smith Rowe, Semenyo, Minte, Brereton, Diaz and Rodgers. Again, spoken about all of those enough today. I think we'd probably both agree Smith Rowe and Rodgers, or would you probably the 2 better, cheaper assets?
Those are the 2 for me at the moment. Smith Rowe was in my side from game week 1 anyway. Very happy with his performances, and I think the minutes improve week on week.
Yeah, he's getting slowly more minutes to slowly fit each
like
game.
5 more minutes each time at the moment. So yeah, I'm hoping that just continues to improve, and he becomes more accustomed to the way that Fulham are playing as well. But Rodgers as well, I think if another 0.6 cheaper at time of recording at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think both of those are great options. Those are probably my favourite 2 right now. Ask me again next week though, and if Minte gets another 90 or near enough 90 minutes, then he comes into the discussion. For now though, obviously with the Arsenal game first up, you look at Smith Rowe and Rodgers as the first 2 for me.
Okay, I agree with that. And I'm going to say stick around to the end of the pod because we will reveal we've both already replaced Nkunku, haven't we?
We might have, yeah.
So we've already both made our transfer and we've removed Nkunku. So at the end, when we go through our teams, we'll explain who we've gone for out of those options there. Of course, there were just a few other questions that didn't quite fit into the discussions around teams. Someone said, and I think this is such a great question, I'm finding it very difficult to understand when to make early transfers and prioritize team value versus waiting for more info and accepting price changes. So basically, do you move early to let Nkunku look like he was going to drop on Sunday, and he did? Do you move on a Sunday over 5 or 6 days before the deadline to save that 0.1 or not? So do you have kind of, I don't know, like a structure in place for when you decide when to make moves? Is it dependent upon the move? Like, how do you know when to prioritize team value or prioritize further information? Because a lot of the teams in the Prem, by the way, are playing midweek.
Yeah.
And I don't think people realize that. There's a ton of games in the Carabao Cup, second round, first round, third round, something like that, where a lot of them are playing. So we could get injuries. So it's very risky. But what's your kind of motto for this?
Yeah, I've got a loose rule on it. And okay. I do make exceptions based on getting priced out. But if I've got money to play with, so if I'm downgrading a position, then I don't mind necessarily waiting for that more information. The asterisk there, I would say, is midweek this week, for example, some teams are playing, others aren't.
Yep.
And the teams that don't have the midweek fixture, obviously, training injuries do happen, but they are much rarer than injuries in a 90-minute football match.
Yep.
So you feel slightly more covered there. The other thing to say is, okay, I might be able to save some money this week, but what am I using that money for in the future? If I've got moves that, okay, it doesn't block me this week, but it does block me in a couple of weeks from getting to the route that I want to go down, then maybe it is worth moving just slightly earlier, taking that small risk, hopefully without having a match in between your decision and the game week deadline would be best. And yeah, I think it is something you've got to play a little bit on gut instinct at the start of the season. But yeah, as you said, we've both made moves early. Yeah. So we are risking it a little bit this week.
And I don't normally do it. In fact, I normally advocate against it. But I think on top of what you've just said there about all of that in terms of like what your rule is, I would say not only if you have the money to play with, but also like how sure are you on that person as an asset? Because sometimes on a sundown, like Madueke, it looks really good, scored a hat-trick, I might go for him. But if Madueke's not been in my thinking anyway, and it's just in relation to the game week that's just gone, then I'm less likely to want to make that move. Whereas if it's someone that I eyed up from game week 1 and I looked at game week 3 as a possible fixture swing and I was looking at them anyway, and I think they've looked good across the first 2 game weeks, they've played a lot of minutes. If I'm more sure about them as an asset, I feel more comfortable moving early. And I think for me, the money in the bank might not feel really useful now, but
it will be.
Even if you don't have a planned move, like I had 2 million in the bank before making my move, so I had so much flexibility to let Nkunku drop. But as you say, I don't know. It might be that I want to upgrade Raya to Henderson to Raya. It might be that I then want to move from Isak to Watkins, as well as do this to that. So money is always useful. And once you lose 0.1, you've almost lost 0.5 at this stage of the season, because you then can't move to a player at that same price. So listen, there are multiple things to think about. But for me, early transfers are slightly better at the start of the season when you're trying to build up team value. And if you are very sure about an asset, then I would do it. And also if you've got cover on the bench. Like for me,
that's the other thing.
I've got Pedro Porro on the bench this week. If something happens to my team and I need to start Pedro Porro, I'd actually quite like that.
Yeah,
I'd like
fine.
the ability to start him. So I also think you need to look at your bench. But there are various things you think about, and it depends on you as a manager. And you just got to get lucky as well. It could be that 3 of your players get injured this midweek and you're like, okay, now I wish I hadn't made that move, because like, let's say Salah randomly got injured midweek, which fingers crossed he doesn't. I probably wouldn't have made the Nkunku move. I'd remove Salah instead with my 1 free transfer. So yeah, it's a risk, but I think sometimes it is required. The next question is actually about wildcard. So people are obviously starting to think about wildcard. This is probably the earliest week in which people that didn't plan for it ahead are thinking, I've had a couple of weeks of data now. My team's not in a great position. What do you think about an early wildcard? What is it something that you would do? And I asked Praz this last week for Game Week 2, but in Game Week 3, under what conditions do you think a Game Week 3 wildcard is warranted? When would you consider playing it?
Yeah, so this week, I think I have seen some teams out there where a wildcard probably is warranted. I think it's isolated incidents where you've just gotten incredibly unlucky through injuries, and maybe you've taken 1 or 2 upside risks on minutes, like we have, I guess, with Nkunku, Hall in my case too. And just so many of those cards have come down looking pretty negative for you. And yeah, look, there's never a yes or no answer. It is sadly team dependent, but I have seen instances out there where I would probably click a wildcard button now if things had gone against me. I think it would need to be 5 or 6 players that were kind of
is that your sweet spot?
I would say so, and I would say it's also got to be integral to your structure. So in my side right now, I've got Lewis Hall, Barco, both looking like extreme minutes for it. Obviously, Barco's not going to get any minutes. He's sunning himself in Sevilla. And Lewis Hall looks very risky, as does Nkunku. So I'm already fairly worried about all 3 of those. But I've got 2 free transfers. I can remove the major issue in Nkunku this week, and Hall can probably just sit on my bench. So I think there are different issues and different weightings at how much I consider them an immediate right now problem, and how many of them I can maybe just kick it down the road 1 more week. Barco, I'm happy to just sit on my bench for a few weeks right now. But yeah, there are definitely instances out there where wildcarding now could suit your team. And planning an early wildcard in general, if you go into the season planning it, you can really structure your side to build up for a 4-game week spread or a 5-game week spread. And not have to worry about those injuries, and you can afford a player to get injured or sold, and okay, you don't need to use the transfer because you're going to use a wild card in a couple of weeks anyway. So yeah.
Okay, cool. And then, so the final thing then is, when are you looking to wildcard? Have you identified a period in time or a specific set of game weeks? And if so, why is that?
Yeah, so I went into the season quite strongly advocating for a Game Week 6 wildcard. I checked out the FPL Wire, so Praz, who you had on last week, was absolutely fantastic on this and really convinced me that that was a window that I wanted to attack. I felt that the 5-game week spread for the likes of a Newcastle, a Fulham as well, really like the look of that. And I also like that trio combination of the 5.5s I discussed earlier in that 5-game week spread. So I went into the season quite strongly on that, with the slight acceptance that I thought Arsenal's defence was so good that I'm just going to go with it anyway, even if the fixtures aren't looking good. And as it's turned out so far, yes, I'm still very hot on a Game Week 6 wildcard because I like the fixture swing, but I'm now more open to leaving it if I think I can use my free transfers to just pivot away from... I think Haaland at some point you're going to want to consider a Salah instead. And a big reason I wanted a Game Week 6 wildcard was maybe I just do a swap where I get rid of Saka and Haaland in one for like a Watkins and a Salah around Game Week 5. And then I can just not have to worry about that long term. I can just wildcard out of it. Whereas now, maybe there's a way I can get in Salah alongside Haaland instead. So... yeah, I'm not locked in, but I went into the season quite strongly considering a Game Week 6.
Yeah, and as you say, lots of not only fixture swings out for teams like Newcastle, Fulham and Liverpool, whose fixtures start to tail off a little bit around Game Week 6, but also teams that we maybe don't own assets from, such as Brentford, have a really nice run of fixtures at that stage. Arsenal, I know a lot of people have one or two, but if you don't, they've got Leicester and Southampton in the immediate weeks from 6 onwards. So fixture swings, players, data, I think 5 weeks is enough.
Yeah.
I would say as of right now, game week 6 looks like the best early wildcard window, even though it's not that early. Beyond that, I don't see one right now. I mean, 8 and 11 I've looked at look okay, but that's really dependent upon my team. And then beyond that, you can keep it until like 17, 18 and just play it as late as you can, which sets you up really well for the back end of the season. But it is just going to depend on your team and also what happens over the next few weeks, right? If Haaland scores back-to-back hat-tricks now and Salah blanks in game week 3 and Haaland's just looking... I'm probably going to play game week 4 wildcard and I'll probably pivot back to Haaland and I'll just accept my mistakes. But it really is going to depend on what happens over the coming weeks. I also think game week 4 is going to be good because it's after the international break. You've got a few weeks to think. You can really think about it, deal with any issues that crop up over the international break. So, yeah, let's loosely say 4 if you're not going this week. 6 is probably the best. And then beyond that, there might be future windows, but we need to wait and see with which teams we want to attack.
Those 5 free transfers as well, that's big.
Yes.
So you can now afford to be a bit more flexible with your wildcard window. If you're able to bank a transfer or 2 now, you can almost do a mini wildcard without having to click that button. So I think the wildcard now is much more flexible than it's ever been before if you're able to save those transfers early doors.
That is absolutely true because the wildcard's not going to wipe those transfers. So it's not like you can roll up to 5 and then you decide you want to wildcard and think, but I don't want to. You could just wildcard and keep those 5 transfers. So yeah, I would agree with that. So hopefully that helps. There are a lot of questions about wildcards at the moment. So the next section is just quick fire questions. So I've just written down 6 quick fire questions. And when I say quick fire, they don't have to be one-worders, but 5 to 10 seconds, absolutely maximum. So just go through what comes to you instinctively. And if you get it wrong, we will hold you to it. Okay, so you ready?
Okay, go for it.
Top 3 Nkunku replacements.
I would say Eze if you've got the 0.6, Smith Rowe, and then Rodgers after that, in that order.
Perfect. Very good. If you were wildcarding now, would you have Salah, Haaland, both or neither?
I would tentatively go with Haaland with Palmer draft, so no Salah still. And I'd probably try and caveat that with a Jota.
Sell Isak or keep for a bit longer?
Keep. Definitely keep.
Sell Son for Palmer for free, assuming no other issues in your team?
If Solanke isn't fit... then definitely hold. Even if he is fit, then I'd still just leave it for now.
Okay. Sell Henderson for Raya for a -4 hit if someone's got the money in the bank.
Depends on wildcard window, but I would say it's probably not worth the hit. Just hold on to it for now.
And then best forward under 6.5 million.
João Pedro.
Very good.
Yeah, I like João Pedro a lot. Hot on him.
No sitting on the fence there. I like it. Perfect. So there are some quick fire questions. People seem to like that section. So there we go. So the next one is actually our prediction game for FPL Therapy. If you are new to the podcast, by the way, if you are new to the podcast and you're still listening, we've been going for over an hour and a half, by the way.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you are still listening at this point, please do consider liking and subscribing on YouTube and rating 5-star on audio. It massively supports us. And obviously, every single week, different guests. And hopefully you've enjoyed it. So thus far, we've had Praz, Harry and Focal. Praz is top with 20 points. He managed in game week 2, which is actually very good. Harry and Focal, obviously, with both game week 1 guests, they got 12 and 10, so not so good. Okay. So at the moment, 20 to beat, which is quite high.
Okay.
So your 3 differentials, we spoke about a lot already, so we're going to fly through them. But the first is Gibbs White. You fancy him to do quite well against Wolves? Was that just how well he did against your own team?
It's a couple of factors. Wolves obviously looked at 6s and 7s, and Gibbs White is going up against his old team. We know there's a bit of a grudge match there. I just fancy it. He's on penalties. He'll get 90 minutes. It's all of the boxes ticked, and he did look obviously fantastic against us too. So, I'd be surprised if he doesn't at least get some sort of attacking return there.
Okay, so Gibbs White, your first differential that you expect to do well in game week 3. The next is Leon Bailey. We spoke about Rodgers, but we did say Bailey could be the type to get more FPL returns. So you just think this could be the week we all load up on Rodgers and actually it's Bailey that does well?
It would be so typical, wouldn't it? It also does matter that Rodgers is now over 10% owned, I think. So I couldn't quite go there. I think I probably would have still gone with Bailey to kind of spread my bets a little bit anyway. I do like Bailey a lot. He's got great underlying data. He will have to do it in 70 minutes, though. So fingers crossed he can perform. I like the fixture, and Bailey is a great player. So, hot on him.
Awesome. And then your third and final differential for game week 3 is Brian Mbeumo, who somehow is only 5% owned against your team as well.
Surprising.
So you think he could still do well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you watched the Southampton game, and I really hope you didn't because you would have suffered through it. But yeah, we were open in those spaces that Mbeumo and Wissa would like to get into in behind the left or the right-hand centre-backs. We play with a back three and an advanced two wing-backs. I think Mbeumo gets in behind very nicely there. On penalties, you would expect to continue with Tony off. I really couldn't be more hot on it, to be honest. If I was on a free hit this week, for instance, he'd be one of the first options on my team sheet.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I am very jealous of those that are moving to Mbeumo this week. I just think with 4 and 5 in mind, I think I'm going to wait until game week 6.
Yeah,
now.
I'd agree with that.
Cool. Right. So just to finish up then, the moment you've probably been waiting for, if you've skipped to this section, I always say it's outrageous behaviour and go back and listen to the rest of the pod. But these are our teams for FPL Game Week 3. So we'll start with Sam's team. Just read it out for those of you on audio. So Raya in goal. Robinson, Trent and Porro in defence. A midfield of Fernandes, and this is the transfer, Rodgers, Smith Rowe and Saka. And then a front line of Isak, Haaland and Armstrong, currently with Minte, Hall and Barco on the bench. So looking a little bit light this week on the bench, but you never know. And obviously Minte could still do something against Arsenal. So I'll turn it to you just in case you need to remind yourself. But so talk us through the Nkunku to Rodgers move. You actually didn't make this before Nkunku's price fall, but you have made it before, at the time I was recording, Rodgers rose in price.
Yes.
So was it just a matter of you didn't want to make it immediately because you weren't quite sure, but then you realised you're starting to bleed value a little bit on Nkunku?
Yeah, it was basically because I wasn't completely certain on the night that Nkunku was falling on. By the time I'd had another 24 hours to think about it, I podded with Tom on who got the assist last night as well. And the more I started discussing it with friends, the more I looked into the data as well and looked back at Match of the Day as well, because I watched it live, but I'd had a drink or two, so I wanted to remember it correctly. Rodgers just looked absolutely fantastic, and I was convinced that after all of that research yesterday, that I was ready to back the move. After the first few hours, I rarely like to knee-jerk immediately.
Yeah.
I usually like a day, and 0.1 is annoying, but it's not completely season-defining. Whereas if Rodgers starts increasing and Nkunku gets another drop, then it starts looking quite dodgy. Because Aston Villa don't play midweek as well, that's quite big for me. And I think that reduces the risk.
And something to note is you didn't use your free transfer in Game Week 2. So you also still have another free transfer to use if something were to go wrong midweek.
Absolutely.
Which is a massive advantage that you have that I don't.
Yeah.
In terms of the rest of the team, are there any other moves you could see yourself making with the one free transfer this week? And if so, who would it likely be?
Yeah, so Hall is obviously going to be an issue. I think I can probably just survive that for this week. I think the 3 defenders that I'm starting, I'm happy enough with. Even with the 3 away fixtures, I think they're all 3 attacking enough that you can hopefully rely on the attacking returns and maybe just sit with it. But Hall will probably have to go next week. If I was to sell him right now, it would probably be for Konza. But I don't know if Konza is enough of an upgrade this week to start him ahead of any one of those 3 that I'm willing to use another free transfer. And it gives me that slight less flexibility moving forwards as well. So if I was to use another one, it'd probably be that. The other player that obviously we've talked about that at first instinct, if I was a knee-jerking manager, then it would be Bruno. But his data's fantastic. He's got Southampton game week 4. I just want to hold on for that little bit longer in the hope that he repays the faith very, very shortly. So I think just the one for now. And then if an injury occurs, then at least I've got that in my back pocket.
Yeah, it's a really strong team. 1.4 in the bank, free transfer to use, very flexible. And I obviously like the Nkunku to Rodgers move because that's what I've done myself. So just to go through my team for game week 3, I've already made my transfer and I obviously made one in game week 2 to bring him a knee. So I'm sat here with 0 free transfers, but 3.5 million in the bank. No idea what I want to actually use that on. That's not saved for anything in particular, but it's just the transfers that I've made. So Henderson in goal, a back line of Robinson, Gabriel and Trent. So actually I'm benching Porro this week, which I don't love, but I just think that Robinson and Gabriel have better fixtures and I'm never going to bench Trent. So I think it makes sense in this situation. I could have, like I said, kept Nkunku and just played Porro at 4 at the back, but I've taken out Nkunku and it is for Rodgers. I made this on Sunday night, so I made it before Nkunku's price fall, but it's not something I would usually recommend. And I could have quite comfortably, having the money in the bank that I had, waited. I wanted to maximize team value at the start of the season. And Rodgers, for me, stands out as such a great player. And because I have Porro on the bench, I thought if something goes wrong, I just play Porro.
Backup. Yeah.
So I don't have a huge... I even have Greaves on the bench as well if I need to, who I don't expect a clean sheet for Ipswich at all, but he's shown some attacking threat. So so the midfield is Rodgers, Eze, Salah, Jota, Saka. Salah will be my captain again this week, although there is some temptation to go for Saka in my position. I think if you have Haaland, you captain Haaland, but United could be so hit or miss. Normally against Liverpool, we capitulate. And I didn't like what I saw at points against Brighton. So my gut instinct is Salah is the best captain here, but Saka is absolutely viable. So I have that option there.
Yep.
And then my front two is Menez and Isak. I'm very happy having Menez. I just need him to outscore Smith Rowe this week. So yeah, like I said, 3.5 in the bank. I've used my transfer to bring in Rodgers. No Nkunku issues. My bench, I'm delighted with. Valdemarsson, just I won't ever play anyway. Porro, really good backup if I need him. Greaves, like I said, I still think is the best 4 million defender now. I've got the 4.5 forward. My instinct at the moment is probably that my next transfer might be to upgrade that forward. Because as we said, Rodgers is great, but not necessarily as an attacker you have to start every week.
Yeah.
And I might have other issues that crop up. So whilst I could do something where I upgrade Eze or upgrade Menez, like I can do Eze to Palmer now for a -4. Which I'm not going to do, but I like it. But so I have those options there with the 3.5 in the bank. I can upgrade Menez all the way to Watkins comfortably with a -4. So there are options, but my gut instinct now is actually that it's my 4.5 forward that goes up and that I have then 8 attackers that is a little bit more flexible. But it will depend on my wildcard window. So I think for me, going into Game Week 4 over the international break, I need to commit to a wildcard or at least commit to saying, probably not Game Week 6, in which case I would like 8 attackers because what I would like is a deeper squad that I can rely on longer term.
Yeah.
So I think that's it for me. I'm really, really happy. I will just say as the sort of final question to you then, if you didn't have Haaland, would you captain Salah or do you think you'd be slightly tempted by Saka against Brighton at home?
I think I'd go with Salah. I think I'd stick it on Salah. I do like Saka at home to Brighton, but Brighton have shown signs of being slightly more defensively solid under Hurtzler, and Hurtzler comes into the league with a reputation of someone that is able to control games a bit better. So I think overall, given Salah's record, and we maybe shouldn't obsess over the record because different players, different seasons, but he is just the king of FPL, right? He will find a way to score against Man United almost certainly.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not like Man United at the moment look like they're completely resolving all of their defensive frailties from last season. So I think I would probably stick it on Salah.
I would agree with all of that. Sad to say, I don't like. I've got triple Liverpool and Salah captain against the team that I support, but I know full well. I remember last season I had Haaland. No, maybe the season before that it was Haaland captain and Foden, and they both scored hat-tricks against United. So I don't let bias get in the way here, and I don't see that as a bad fixture, particularly for Liverpool. So there we go. Those are our teams, and that is the Game Week 3 episode. So most importantly, if you've not checked out Sam's YouTube channel, FPL Pricey, please go and check it out. Show him some support. The content is unbelievably good. I promise you will not regret it. And also check out Who Got the Assist, the podcast that you're a co-host for on audio and on YouTube as well. And just thank you very much for being on the podcast, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. Absolutely brilliant studio. Great guest so far as well. So yeah, good luck to you. I think this is a really big thing for FPL.
Thank you, mate. I've loved it. And also, if you are still listening right now, please do rate us 5-star on podcast, Spotify, Apple, and also make sure to subscribe on YouTube. Let's try and hit 10,000 subscribers before the next episode. But until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.